Chapter 1500. Nothing Prophecy's performance was not bad. He performed at his best. He managed to survive 20 hits from Su Huai. Even though the duel lasted less than 2 minutes, it was the longest battle Su Huaishang had ever fought in since the start of the S3 competition. In the previous 9 rounds, Su Huaishang rarely lost to her opponents after 10 moves, not counting the fact that her opponents ran away from the start of the duel. Of course, for the majority of the audience, the difference between losing within 10 moves and losing within 20 moves was something they didn't understand and didn't care about. Thus, after this battle, Prophecy's evaluation and popularity didn't change much. He was still as miserable as before. By the way, 1 month later, he finally changed his game ID under the suggestion of the company's management team. However, that was a digression. Now that the 3 matches were over, the score was 3-0. The focal battle between Mountain River and Hell Frontline ended with Hell Frontline continuing to maintain the sweeping record. Fortunately, Qiufeng's Vanguard battle was not bad. Judging from the process of the match, he was infinitely close to winning. This also saved some face for the team. If the process of the first match was the same as the last 2, then Mountain River would have lost too sullenly. To make a long story short, once the match was over, Brother Ju and the others returned to the meeting room. They immediately opened the in-game livestream channel. They wanted to see how the other matches were going. First was the match between Order and Star. From the 3 o'clock score on the channel, it was obvious that the match was over. This was not a surprising result. After all, the difference in ability between the 2 teams was obvious. However, the formation that Order used for this match was different from the one they used against non-professional teams. When they were fighting against amateur teams, they used Understanding Death as the starter, followed by Yi Ji and Barcode, and Lying Drunk as the 3rd player. However, in this round, they used Meng Jingchan as the starter, followed by Understanding Death and Sashimi, and Lying Drunk as the 3rd player. Although the result was still a clean sweep, it was obvious that Order valued Star more, so they strengthened their lineup for the first 3 rounds. Their train of thought was very clear. Unless they were facing a very threatening team like Gods, there was no need to consider the balance of the formation. They would try their best to defeat their opponents within 3 rounds. This way, less information would be exposed. Therefore, it was difficult for Star to escape this calamity. Then, he looked at the match between World of Martial Arts and Wind and Cloud. When Feng Bujue and the others' match ended, World of Martial Arts was already leading 2 o'clock, and the general tournament was still ongoing. Even though Laughing at the Heavens from the Laughing Sword and Saber had announced his retirement and would not be participating in this S3, Jianghu was still very strong. Blade Runner, Bladeless Swordsman, Not a Scaredy Cat, and Botinga. These 4 main players were all top players, and their overall strength was more than 1 level higher than Wind and Cloud. If nothing went wrong, it was only a matter of time before Wind and Cloud was defeated. Finally, there was a focal battle, which was the battle between Loser Alliance and Frost Monarch. That was more of a stalemate. From the battle records displayed at the side of the channel, Loser Alliance sent out 7 kills, who almost instantly killed Hot Afternoon from Frost Monarch. In the middle battle, the combination of Weary Dream and Shadow King fought against A Name Is So Hard, specialized in healing and combat, and A Name Is So Hard, specialized in combat and spiritual spells. This battle took a long time, but in the end, Loser Alliance won. Then, in the general tournament, Flying Pegasus lost to A Name Is So Hard within a minute. It was not hard to see that this was a strategic victory. Frost Monarch had obviously guessed Brother Ma's appearance before the match and successfully sniped him. Otherwise, there was no reason for him to let a person who specialized in shooting play as the 2nd player. In conclusion, after the first 3 matches, the total score of the 2 teams was 2-1. At this moment, the general tournament was about to begin. The people from Underworld Frontline also locked the live stream on this match. The match will start in 30 seconds. Once the system announced, the contestants entered the stage. From Loser Alliance, it was Honghu and Uncle Worthless. From Frost Monarch, it was Atobi-sama and Black White Gray. Humph. So, He did leave Teacher G as the last general to hold the fort. Once he saw the two, Atobi scoffed. That ambitionist sure is merciless. Although your tone sounds quite relaxed, can I take what you're saying to mean that we're hanging in the balance? After joining Frost Monarch, Black, White, Gray had undoubtedly inherited their studio's glorious tradition. Whenever they had the chance, they would mock or bully the president. What's there to be worried about? Atobi added. Who knows who will win before the match? I'm also very strong, okay? Then, I'm dragging you down, right? Black, White, Gray smirked. Fine, fine. My lady, you're stronger than me, okay? Even though Atobi did not have much self-control, he was still a gentleman. He often argued with the three members of Ming Nan Nan, so when he was mocked by the girls, he would endure it if he could, but when he could not, he would endure it. On the other hand, on the other side of the barrier, Uncle Worthless maintained his posture with his arms crossed before his chest. With a defeated expression, he mumbled weakly, "It feels good to have a girl in the team. What are you trying to say?" Hong, who heard the hidden meaning in the man's words, and narrowed his eyes. "It's nothing. I just want to mock you," Uncle Worthless said. "Along the way, every team that we've met seems to have a female member. So what?" Hong, who forced himself to use a nonchalant tone. "Actually, I went to the official website yesterday to check. Of the remaining 53 teams, our team is the only one with all male members." Uncle Worthless added, "That's why I'm asking you, so what?" Hong, who was getting impatient. "Tis." Uncle Worthless put on a thoughtful expression. "Tell me, why didn't we think of recruiting a female member back then?" "Of course, because we already have 7 male members," Hong, who replied. "Sigh, we're all players who don't have a studio, so we should have the freedom to form a team. How do we end up forming a team that only consists of men?" Uncle Worthless acted like he did not hear Hong, who, and continued to talk to himself. "What's the point of saying that now?" Hong, who said, "Back then, if you'd suggested for OL to give up his spot and recruit a female member, how hard would it have been? Other people aside, OL by himself would have been the first to agree." "I just didn't think about it," Uncle Worthless said. "When I came to, everyone was already there." He shrugged helplessly. "Now that I saw the other team have a female member, I couldn't help but sigh. If you really care that much, why don't you switch into a female outfit in the next round?" Hong, who added, "Perhaps the other team will be so scared that they'll disconnect when they see you, and we'll win without a fight." After that, he paused for half a second before adding, "Oh, but that's only if we have a next round." Even though the two of them were chatting happily, they were actually under a lot of pressure. Only the members of the Trash Alliance knew that they had arranged a 4-match lineup. Teacher Fong, who was left for the last match, wasn't there to hold the line. Instead, he had never planned to fight. To put it simply, if Hong Hu and Uncle Worthless failed to win this double match, causing the score to be 2-2, then they would most likely be eliminated. Of course, pressure was one thing. In terms of ability, they still had the upper hand. Even though Atobi was already one of the top players from a professional perspective, he was still a new player who had been in the game for only 1 year. Black, White, and Gray, who were his support, were not as strong as Yi Ji from regulation. According to the hard power of both sides, if they fought normally, the chances of Ice Emperor winning were very slim. Hence, the only thing that concerned Hong, who was whether or not the other party had some tricks up his sleeves that he had never revealed before and could only use once. Chapter 1501. The countdown ended and the barrier disappeared. Atobi's dirty trick had finally arrived. Naturally, he knew that he had no chance of winning against these two, so he did not hesitate to use his trump card from the beginning. 6 worlds in heaven, all are in search of glass. Sumeru Frost Kuei. When Atobi uttered the word liberation, the weapon in his hand, a pure white large fan, exploded with a shocking amount of energy. At that moment, a chill spread out from him, and in the blink of an eye, it covered a radius of several miles. Seeing this, Hong Hu's expression shifted. As he pulled the bowstring, he mumbled, "Could this be Zampa-Kudo?" As he said that, a light arrow was shot out, and it flew accurately toward Black, White, and Gray, who were hiding behind Atobi. But to his surprise, his arrow only flew for less than 5 meters before it disappeared in midair. From the way the light arrow dissipated, it was neutralized by some other energy. Oh, you can even do such a thing? Hong was indeed surprised. Based on the information that he had, be it in terms of energy intensity or skill in using energy, Atobi had not reached the level where he could create a protective barrier or territory. Hey, don't space out. Just as Hong was thinking, Uncle Worthless beside him suddenly reached out to grab his shoulder. As he spoke, he pulled him backward and jumped. 2 seconds later, Hong, who was already in midair, realized with shock that, when he left the ground, his feet below his ankles were covered in a layer of frost. The current Atobi is no match for you if you're distracted. Uncle Worthless might look like a slob, but at a moment like this, his reaction speed was faster than Honghu's. Like what happened earlier, if this happens again, I might not be able to save you in time. I'm sorry. Honghu put on a serious expression. There won't be a next time. As he spoke, he had already circulated his spirit energy and gathered it at his feet. He took the opportunity to touch his feet and shatter the layer of frost. At the same time, Ice Emperor and Ice Emperor, who remained on the ground, had already begun their next step. In those few seconds, Atobi created a standing ice board several meters before him. It was 3 centimeters thick and 2 meters long and wide. As for black, white, and gray, at some point in time, they had summoned a strange woman in a 16th century European-style red dress. Her face was pale, and blood was oozing out of her 7 orifices. From her appearance, one could guess that this summoned creature was not good at fighting, but had some kind of special ability. Honghu. Suddenly, black, white, gray quickly recited Honghu's name 3 times. When the last word was uttered, Honghu, who was far away on the horizon, was passively teleported to the ice board that Atobi had created. This time, Ambitionist was not just shocked. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was scared half to death. He had just managed to spit out a single word when a bone-piercing chill and fear swept through his entire body. When he calmed down and lowered his head to observe, the ice board that acted as the mirror had already disintegrated and reassembled to seal his body in ice. Hit! The next second, Atobi's shout arrived, and the blade of the large fan in his hand, like a strange blade in the shape of lightning, it slashed down diagonally at Honghu's neck. This series of actions was so sudden that it caught Honghu off guard. First, Atobi activated his expensive Soul's Eye weapon spirit fusion. By sacrificing his main weapon, a legendary fan-shaped weapon, as the price, he summoned the Bankai of his sorcery weapon. Sumeru Frostkue, the stronger the sacrificed weapon, the stronger the effect of the Bankai. In this state, Atobi's psychic pressure, energy, would increase to a level that even experts like Drunken Man could not match. Combined with the frost effect of Sumeru Frost, he could freely control the cold air around him to freeze any nearby target in a short amount of time. In fact, he could even freeze the air. Other than that, the stand-in that Black-White-Gray summoned, Bloody Mary, was also a unique skill. Name, Summon, Bloody Mary, stand-in type, skill card attribute. Active, permanent skill type. Summon effect, summon a Bloody Mary. Stand-in type summons can be summoned or dismissed at any time. No cooldown, and the duration is based on stamina. Non-multiple stand-ins cannot be summoned multiple times. Stand-in ability points. Damage E, Speed E, Shooting Range C, Duration A, Precision D, Growth D. Stand-in ability. When Bloody Mary materializes, the user only needs to call a character's name 3 times before the mirror to instantly transport that character to the mirror. The summoned party and the summoner must be in the same universe and have seen each other within the past 12 hours. If there is a character with the same name, priority will be given to summoning the character with the same name first seen within the past 12 hours. Consumption can be summoned by concentrating. Learning requirement. Unlocked summoning and sorcery mastery. Implanted stand-in disc after being shot or injured by an arrow. Once visited the devil's palm to equip the saint's body. Remark. This countess had an unbelievably seductive appearance, a brilliant mind, and an arrogant temperament. For a long time, she was regarded as one of the most beautiful women in Hungary. When she was very young, the countess showed signs of violence and sadism. When she grew up, she took pleasure in torturing the beautiful maids and the young girls of the commoners. When she reached middle age, the countess finally began to study black magic and witchcraft. She tried to use the blood of virgins to keep herself young forever. Cruel killings continued to take place in her castle. It was like purgatory on earth. Her atrocities continued for decades, directly causing the deaths of hundreds of people. Even her identity as a noble could not protect her anymore. She was sentenced to never step out of her castle. When the masons sealed all the doors and windows of her residence, her castle became a large, dark tomb. But in the end, she never admitted to her crimes, nor did she express any remorse for what she had done. Bloody Mary's 6 measurements were nothing compared to a substitute's ability, but it had a special effect that could be called a cause-effect skill. It was this special effect that pushed Hong Hu to the brink of death. Even Uncle Worthless, who was watching from off in the distance, could only snort inwardly and think to himself, Hong Hu is hopeless now. However, Hong Hu himself still hadn't given up. Even if he was going to die, he still wanted to find a way to survive. Ka. At that moment, there was the sound of ice cracking. When Atobi's attack landed, all it hit was ice shards that fell to the ground. Where do you think you're going? Even though Atobi's attack missed, he did not lose sight of his target. He knew what Hong Hu had done and where he had escaped to. Therefore, he roared and gave chase. I don't plan to run. When Hong Hu replied, his body had already flashed to the side of the black, white, and gray duo. At this moment, he was not holding a light bow in his hand, but a short and flat light blade. As for what he wanted to do, it was clear at a glance. Since he had already used such a self-harming move like messing up Heavenly Scale, he might as well fight with his life, damn it. When Atobi saw Hong Hu's movement, he cursed internally because he had confirmed that his teammate was about to die. After activating the messy scale of heaven, Ambition's body was completely controlled by the strings formed by the spirit particles. He was like a puppet that was being forcefully pulled. Not only did this greatly increase his speed and strength, it also allowed him to do some actions that were impossible to do with normal strength. Earlier, it was with the aid of this skill that Hong Hu was able to struggle free from the ice binding on his body and evade Atobi's fatal slash. Of course, there was a price to be paid for this method of pulling oneself like a puppet. Because the body was completely under the control of the spiritual seed, the main body would continue to be in a state of exhaustion. Under such a premise, the ambitionous movements, which were against the human body's laws of motion, were fast and strong, could easily break his bones, tear his tendons, and even destroy his blood vessels and nerves. In other words, each of his fast and powerful movements was equivalent to self-harming. However, Hong Hu believed that it was worth it. Currently, he had to maintain this condition to be able to move around Atobi, who had activated his Bankai, or else, with his original physical skill, he would be trapped by the chill in the air in less than 5 seconds, and he would be slowly frozen. Since he had no other choice, Hong Hu had to activate this skill until he died, and before he died, he had to drag one of them down with him. Perhaps Black-White Ash could escape from Hong Hu in his normal state and deal with him, but before the current Hong Hu, there was nothing she could do. The only thing she could rely on was her life points and defense, but even that did not last for more than 2 seconds. 2 seconds later, Atobi, who had arrived, kicked Hong Hu's waist, but it was too late. When Hong Hu was kicked away, Black-White Ash had already collapsed. Damn it! Atobi grumbled through gritted teeth when he realized that he was unable to save his teammates. He stomped on the ground and gave chase. Stop struggling. It's already confirmed that we've won. With Tengu Masquerade, even if Hong Hu was kicked away, he could change his direction in midair. As he ran, he used a confident tone to tell Atobi, I know that your power has greatly increased, and you're very confident, but the reality is, even if I die, with your current combat ability, the chance of you defeating Uncle Worthless in a duel is very slim. How will we know if we don't try? Atobi agreed with the man internally, but he would not admit defeat. We can find out even if we don't try, right? Who said. Then he was reminded of something, and he laughed. Ha! Brother Atobi, acting like a fool is not going to solve the problem. If you wish to learn from my nemesis, let me give you a piece of advice. Fong Bujue is not really crazy. He is. What did you say? Before he finished, Atobi cut him off loudly. Fong Bujue's nemesis is you? His voice rose an octave. It's me, okay? I've had a grudge with him since the closed beta. Where did you get to know him? Since when did you become his nemesis? Huh? Ambitionist didn't like to hear that. What? What kind of statement is that? Can the depth of hatred be measured by the length of time? Furthermore, you're not the same type of player as him, okay? How can you be his nemesis? Of course. Does nemesis have to be the same type? Atobi was not convinced. Hanamichi Sakuragi and Kid Rukawa, Iori Yagami and Kyokuzunaji, Satoshi and Shigeru, Goku and Vegeta, which pair the same type. While the two were arguing and chasing each other inside Underworld Frontline's conference room, these two idiots just fight. Why drag me into this? Fong Bujue held his chin with one hand and stared at the screen with his dead fish eyes as he cursed weakly. I'm curious as well. Ruoyu picked up where he left off and asked, of the two of them, who do you think is your nemesis? Huh? Brother Ju laughed drily and turned to look at Ruoyu. Did you see my expression? I saw it. I'm sorry, but I can't beat you up every time I see it. Ruoyu's sarcastic skills were showing signs of surpassing her master. The meaning behind her words was, your expression is as despicable as ever. Fong Bujue sighed deeply. He narrowed his eyes and used his finger to point at the screen. Then, did you see their expressions? The expressions of two men being jealous over another man. What does that mean? Ruoyu narrowed her eyes as well. Once she said that, the other people in the conference room burst out laughing. What I mean is, Brother Ju held his forehead and continued, I'm too lazy to care about them. If they want to find nemesis, they should be a pair. At the same time, inside Regulation's conference room, Phantom Dawn, who had been sitting there watching the match, crossed his arms before his chest and crossed his legs on the table. He looked at the big screen and laughed like a barbell. Hey, what's wrong with you? When Yi, who sat next to him, saw this, she slapped him on his head. What's wrong with you? Do you want to go to the PR department for another month of basic etiquette training? After being scolded by his team leader, Phantom Dawn quieted down. He pursed his lips and straightened his posture. He grumbled softly, I'm just a bit annoyed. He raised his eyes to look at the screen. I should be Fong Bujue's nemesis. What nemesis? There has to be a limit to your Chinibi syndrome. To his surprise, Yiji put on a condescending face and lectured Phantom Dawn like a teacher lecturing a child. Look at those two. They're already so old, but they keep talking about nemesis. They like to announce the name of their fighting style. One is the boss of a studio, and the other is not signed to a studio. It goes to show that they are not required to announce the name of their fighting style. They are willing to do so. Needless to say, they don't have a girlfriend. Do you want to end up like them in a few years? Hearing that, Drunken Life and Barcode were speechless, much less Phantom Dawn. Even Drunken Life and Barcode were speechless and showed sad expressions. This was especially true for Brother Zen. He took a deep drag from his cigarette and downed half a bottle of wine. Also, even if you want to set yourself a nemesis for life to help you improve, why did you choose Fong Bujue? Yiji was not done lecturing him. Is he a good person? What are you competing with him for? Your bottom line? You're digging your own grave. Phantom Dawn's head was almost touching the table. Sis, you're right. I was wrong. I will draw the line between myself and him in the future. 1 second later, the other 5 in the room also said in unison, we will draw the line between ourselves and him as well. Back to the main topic, at that moment on the battlefield, the argument between Atobi and Hong, who had not ended when Uncle Worthless returned. Since the situation had changed, Atobi, who was fighting 2 against 1, had to change his tactic. Instantly, Atobi summoned his mana and raised Sumeru Frost Kue. He used Ice Dragon's Spinning Tail, Void to sweep at Hong Hu. This skill exhausted a lot of mana, but the effect was not to be underestimated. In the blink of an eye, the area that the fan was pointing at turned into a frozen land, and Hong Hu's body was frozen to the ground. After a second of hesitation, Hong Hu, who was at the bottom of his life, chose to give it a try. He tried to use Tengu Mushi to force his way out, but this time he failed to survive the damage caused by the forceful pull. When Atobi reached him, Hong Hu died from the damage from his own skill. Atobi had foreseen this possibility as well. Therefore, when he saw Ambitionist die, he did not hesitate for even a second. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to attack. This change in tactic came suddenly, fast, and powerful. However, as I've said more than once, at this kind of crucial moment, Uncle Worthless' reaction was extremely fast. Facing Atobi's counterattack, he rolled forward, and with a kick, he used the flip-flops that were wrapped in energy to block the fan blade that came back at him. He really is powerful. Even from the perspective of the opponent, Atobi had to admit that Uncle Worthless was incredibly powerful. Be it physical skill, energy, or reflexes, Uncle Worthless was one level above him. When Hong Hu said that the chance was slim, he was not bluffing. But the current me is not completely out of options. While Atobi was thinking, he used the recoil from the exchange of blows to fly backward and retreat. When he retreated, Uncle Worthless chased after him. It was not because he had no plan, but because Uncle Worthless knew that when fighting against the current Atobi, he could not afford to rest and wait. This was because the power of ice was too powerful. Once Uncle Worthless stopped, the effect of freezing would follow him like a shadow. Therefore, the battle had to be carried out in this state of constant movement. This state would be a huge test on one's stamina. If it was dragged into a prolonged battle, Atobi, who was not affected by the low temperature, would slowly gain the upper hand. In conclusion, it was not Atobi who was panicking, but Uncle Worthless. As someone who had sharp battle instinct and tactical thinking, he instantly realized that ending this battle as soon as possible was the last chance for him and the rest of the Worthless Alliance. I can't wait any longer. Atobi is already a top fighter, so I can't expect him to expose himself and be killed by a cardboard box. If I drag this out any longer, when he gets used to my speed, I won't have the chance to do anything. Amidst the tug of war, Uncle Worthless' mind was racing. I should use that thing here, or else I might not be able to pass this round. Chapter 1502. Note: this document is only for the company's internal personnel, level 2 and above, to read. It is a trade secret. The company reserves the right to pursue legal action against those who leak this document. Special note: employees with a history of heart disease are not allowed to read this document. Other employees must ensure that they are emotionally stable, have not eaten in the past 2 hours, and have no obvious intention of defecating. The following is a report on the incident caused by player Chai, blocked, ID, Uncle Worthless, during the Pinnacle S3 Knockout Tournament on the 8th of April. This report will describe the course of events, as well as some follow-up developments related to it. Edit time: 8th of April, 2021. File, codename, FCS0408. This video was taken from the 10th round of S3 between Loser Alliance and Frost Emperor. In the Lieutenant battle between the two teams, player Chai's character, Uncle Worthless, used an item called Magic Moon Prism, item serial number, in 124L3. This item is now isolated from the database, and his character's image changed instantly. As shown in the video, when the item effect was activated, a set of BGM codes was activated, and the special effect of forcing all units that were receiving the item's visual signal to stop and watch. The entire transformation process lasted for 45 seconds. During this time, Uncle Worthless' body was covered by an optical camouflage energy. No matter from which angle one looked at it, he would appear as a white reflective object. Pink, blue, and yellow streams of light would flash and refract. About 14 seconds after the transformation began, the Magic Moon Prism was equipped on Uncle Worthless' chest after spinning for a few rounds. At 20 seconds, the image of a pair of white wings appeared on Uncle Worthless' back and immediately turned into feathers. At 22 seconds, the pink silk-like molecules that bloomed from the Magic Moon Prism quickly wrapped around Uncle Worthless' body. After a burst of light, it turned into a tight-fitting female sailor suit from the 1990s. Around 26 seconds later, a pair of long white gloves was equipped on Uncle Useless' hands in a similar fashion. At 31 seconds, a pair of red high-heeled boots and a blue pleated miniskirt appeared on Uncle Worthless' body. 40 seconds later, a golden headdress appeared on Uncle Useless' forehead, and his hairstyle turned into two ponytails that were almost 3 meters long when the light faded away. While the changes were happening, Uncle Worthless continued to use a movement that was a combination of floor exercise, dance, and ice ballet to guide the students. In the end, he got into a position where he spread his legs apart. The distance between his legs was slightly wider than his shoulders, placed his right hand on his waist, and extended 3 fingers on his left hand, thumb, index finger, and middle finger. He placed the back of his hand on his forehead. Edit time, April 8, 17, 5 p.m. Additional information. When we communicated with the person involved after the incident, he firmly claimed that all these actions and postures were caused by the special effects of the item and not his own will. The relevant information is still being verified. After this set of transformations, player Gene ID, Atobi-sama, who was competing with Uncle Worthless, immediately showed obvious discomfort. About 6 seconds later, his nerve connection was cut off. Edit point, 8th of April, 1:40. Additional information. Our company treats this situation with great importance. Based on the personal information provided by Mr. Worthless, we have contacted Mr. Worthless Hyodii Studio. It has been confirmed that Mr. Worthless has disconnected due to physical discomfort in real life. Mr. Worthless Hyodii Studio was escorted to the nearest hospital by his teammates. After diagnosis, Mr. Worthless Hyodii Studio was fine, and he soon returned home. Based on the competition rules, under these circumstances, the player voluntarily forfeited the match. Therefore, Team Trash Alliance won the match with a total score of 3-1, and Hyodii was eliminated. Edit point, 8th of April, 12:00 a.m. sharp. As of the afternoon of the 8th, our company has received more than 40 complaints regarding the incident that happened at midnight. The number is still increasing. Note, personal complaints have been filed separately. Summary of the complaint organizations and the content of the complaints. International Men's Rights Committee. We feel like we have been violated. International Women's Rights Committee. This is a protest of neoconservatism in a postmodern disguise. Trash Alliance Official Fan Group. Please remove our official authentication on social media and delete all related accounts. Esports Paparazzi Forum. Do you have any professional ethics? Boundless Merit Protection Association. Do you guys still have compassion? Do you have any humanity? Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. Regarding the cancellation of your company's value-added telecommunications business license. Huang Appraisers Club. Due to your live stream incident, we have been blinded. Country X Football Association. This year's team falling in the top 10 competition is obviously your responsibility. The 9 subjects, whose name is inconvenient to reveal. Wu D. I know you can see it. You better stop before going too far. Women's Cross Lovers Protection Association. Why should a group of people who have already been discriminated against bear a deeper misunderstanding and harm? More. Click the link to view the complete list. Due to a large number of complaints, interference from third-party organizations, and police intervention, the company's normal operations were affected to a certain extent. The 11th round of S3 competition will be postponed. Edit point, 12th of April, 12:00 a.m. An announcement has been made on the official website. The 11th round of S3 will be held on 13th of April at 12:00 a.m. The matchup for the 11th round have also been announced. Edit point, 12th of April, 12:00 15 a.m. Additional information. After the matchups were announced, the leader and all members of Band of Brothers immediately contacted our company's customer service and requested a forfeit. See the recording file XDL0412. We are only casual players. We don't intend to risk our lives. After confirming their intentions, their request has been approved. Edit point, 12th of April, 3:17 a.m. Final, tentative, result, and related follow-ups. After discussing with player Chai, the other party has agreed to remove the item, Magic Moon Prism, from his character. Chai guarantees that he will not use similar methods in the future. Our company also promises to strictly check the database and prevent similar items from entering the market. Ice Emperor Studio has announced through their official website that they have no objections to the results of the 10th round. A few days ago, player Gmao had also expressed his opinion on social media. He said that he was quite familiar with the members of Trash Alliance and did not think that the other party used improper methods that exceeded the rules of the game. After the results were announced, most of the players were appeased and did not make a second complaint. As for the handling of complaints by the organization, the board of directors has taken over. For related details, please see the document. Deleted. Edit point, 12th of April, 19 a.m. Chapter 1503. Note that can be said or not said. The content of this chapter and the following chapters are linked to the plot of this book. The first arrival of the Thunderbolt, chapters 101 to 103. If there is any déjà vu content, it is not a coincidence. The commotion caused by Uncle Useless died down after 4 to 5 days. His transformation at that crucial moment not only allowed him to win the match point between Loser Alliance and Frost Emperor, but he also scared away his opponent in the 11th round. Although using the phrase defeating the enemy without fighting to describe, it was a bit an insult to the ancient saying, but overall, it was true. On the morning of the 12th of April, the Dream Company announced that Band of Brothers had forfeited on the official website. After seeing the announcement, the majority of the players expressed that they completely understood and respected their decision. Of course, even if a team forfeited at the last minute, the result of the matchmaking would not change. According to the name list, in the 11th round, the team that was given the bye was Order again. Even if a team suddenly forfeited, the Dream Company would not do something as unprofessional as letting the team that was given the bye fill in the spots because of a change in the number of teams. Therefore, the fact that Order was given the bye did not change. Trash Alliance, who was supposed to fight against Band of Brothers, also announced that they had advanced. The number of teams that would participate in this round would be 24, meaning that there would be 12 matches. At this stage of the S3, there was no such thing as a focal match because the remaining teams, even if they were not professional players, they were still strong. It could be said that every match was very interesting. However, if one had to pick the match with the most attention, it would definitely be Underworld Frontline versus World of Martial Arts. At midnight on the 13th, the match time was up. Loading completed. Tournament for the best S3, round 11. Venue, 10,000 miles of sand. Along with the notification, the players of the two teams were teleported to their respective spectator spaces. 10,000 miles of sand was a legendary place located in the world of lightning. The sand here had buried human bones and dyed the blood of gods. It had been baptized by the 8 dragon god fire and witnessed the death of a sword saint. Many people had died here, and many things had come to an end here. As the battlefield of a huge battle, it was the most suitable place. The match will begin in 30 seconds. When the voice rang out, there was a flash of white light, and Feng Bujue and Blade Runner entered the battlefield. The moment their eyes met, the two of them simultaneously curled up the corners of their mouths, revealing a meaningful smile. The countdown quickly passed. Neither of them moved, nor did they make any preparations. Until the sound of fight rang out, they were still smiling and looking at each other. How nostalgic. After the barrier disappeared, Feng Bujue spoke first. Yeah, Child Jian continued. Now that I think about it, it feels like so many years ago. At this moment, the two of them were referring to the scene when they first met. That day, Fong Bujua was in the first row of the killing game, and his first opponent was Blade Runner. At that time, the two of them were only level 15, and there were no bystanders at all. Now, both of them were top players at level 60 that everyone knew about. The stage they were on was also the peak of the battlefield that everyone was paying attention to. Perhaps this is what they call destiny, Fong Bujua said. To be honest, I really did not expect to run into you in this battle of the vanguard. Huh. When young Master Jian heard this, he replied with a smile, whether it's fate or coincidence. Now that things have come to this, I feel that it's a good thing. As he spoke, he slowly raised his hand and drew his sword. I presume you still remember that day. The victor between us wasn't decided. That was the truth. That day, under the wall of hanging, their battle was interrupted by Swallow Guerin halfway. In the end, both of them were forced out of the scenario at the same time, and neither of them received the reward. All right, I remember. Fong Bujua dragged out his voice and replied weakly. Since that is the arrangement of destiny, then this time, I shall accompany you to the end. At this point, the two of them stopped talking. Their expressions, along with the atmosphere around them, slowly turned serious. The murderous atmosphere was gathering, and a storm was coming. The sky that was originally scorching hot was suddenly filled with wind and clouds. It was as if heaven and earth were preparing for this upcoming battle. The spectators who were watching the match, including the commentators on the livestream channel, were all affected by this atmosphere. They held their breath and were silent. Finally, after a breathtaking standoff, just like their previous duel, Blade Runner made the first move. Child Jin's body was covered in a thick layer of fighting spirit. He raised his sword and charged forward. The sword was like the sea, and the air was like waves. It was as vast as the clouds, and it was as powerful as the heavens. Seeing this, Fong Bujua did not hesitate and turned around to escape. His body was like a dragon, soaring with wings. He broke away from the battle and left behind dust. Oomph! When Child Jian saw that his brother Ju had used the same method as last time, he could not help but laugh. Then he used a Peking opera accent and shouted, "Ha!" When he shouted, Blade Runner swept his sword, and the cold light on his sword surged. The moment he attacked, the sword light was the only movement. It was condensed and focused. What he could only do with his title skill back then, he could now do with a normal physical skill. Child Jian only needed to accelerate explosively, and the distance of more than 10 steps between the two of them disappeared. The moment he circled in front of his enemy, Blade Runner had already slashed down with his sword. Clang! In the next second, sparks flew, and there was a clanging sound. Facing Child Jian's slash, Fong Bujua used the Z-wrench to block. Even though he managed to block the attack, he knew very well that this was just the beginning. As expected, before the energy from the first slash dissipated, Blade Runner's follow-up attack arrived. His sword danced like a butterfly playing with flowers. The wind of the blade chased after the shadow, and the fragrance of the blade dyed one's clothes. When the swords clashed, it was like the sound of a killing bow. Qi surrounded him, and Xiao Fengyun moved in reverse. As one of the strongest swordsmen in Thriller Paradise, Blade Runner lived up to his name. He only used normal moves to attack, but it was enough to dazzle and amaze people. As for Fong Bujua, he did not lose out either. His soul's eye appeared, and he skillfully turned the situation around. He used ingenious movements to avoid the attacks. Even though his opponent's swords were like a net, Brother Ju was able to slip through them without taking any damage. Compared to when they fought years ago, Fong Bujua's improvement was obvious. Good. Child Jian saw this and was not surprised. Instead, he praised his opponent. As soon as he finished speaking, he used a skill. The current Child Jian would not use a skill as polite as lunge straight stab like he did when he was level 15 to deal with Brother Ju. The skill he used now was a grade A skill called the 3 feet of autumn water. Instantly, the sword energy flew through the air, piercing through the clouds. The skill was awe-inspiring and threatening. But this skill missed. In the blink of an eye, the wind swept away the cold shadow, and the blood shadow broke through the void. Feng Bujue immediately activated body enhancement spell, extreme, and used his explosive speed to dodge the grade A skill completely. You're not bad yourself. After Brother Ju dodged the sword skill, he immediately took advantage of the situation and used the wrench to counterattack. Raging Waves and counterattack Mad Sword. Both of them exchanged blows, and it was hard to tell who was the winner. At this moment, at first glance, the two of them seemed to be having a lively and exciting fight. But in reality, they knew very well that from the moment Child Jian made the first move until this moment, they were basically just playing around. They were reenacting the scene of their previous duel. The difference was that the same thing. Back then, they were surrounded by danger, and their lives were hanging by a thread. But now, both of them seemed to be doing it with ease. However, this kind of warming up obviously could not last forever. At this moment, it was about time for them to get serious. The clouds of evil were hazy, and the wind was rustling. When fate was decided, thousands of miles of sand were blown away. Who won? Who lost? Who died? Who lived? If you want to know what happened next, please read the next chapter. Chapter 1504. His attack and defense had advanced, and a new chapter of the battle had begun. Blade Runner's spiritual source was fully charged, and his aura pierced through the white rainbow. As the tip of his sword moved, his ultimate move was revealed, 10,000 attracting heavenly shoe sword. When he shouted, the power of the move had already descended. As the saying goes, Howren's sword cleaves the chaos and tempers the heart 1,000 times. Child Jian's ultimate move was so powerful that it caused the weather to change. Feng Bujue knew how powerful this move was, so he didn't dare to be careless. He immediately activated the defensive effect of Immovable Mountain and used his weapon to block the attack. Buzz! In an instant, a deep sound like a bell rang out. Intense energy exploded on the ground, and a sandstorm surged in all directions. Now that you mention it, in the dissipating dust, Feng Bujue stood tall and unharmed. However, his expression suddenly turned cold. When we were at Lin Lu's inn, I believe I saw you use this skill before. He paused for half a second, and a murderous glint flashed across his eyes. If I remember correctly, you used this skill to kill Ru, right? After his reminder, Child Jian also had an impression of it. That should be the case. Feng Bujue nodded and muttered, since you admit it, then you have to take some responsibility for the various physical injuries I suffered after that. Raw, you beat me up after the seal was shaken, right? Child Jian could only respond in this way because he didn't understand what his opponent was talking about. Of course, whether he understood or not was secondary. As long as Feng Bujue could convince himself with his logic, he could do anything without any pressure. You don't have to say anything. Taste my earth-shattering, heaven-shocking, mixed essence palm. In the next second, Brother Ju changed his stance as he shouted. He used the power that he had been secretly accumulating in his left hand for a long time and blasted out a palm. This move of his was definitely not a bluff. It was the real, earth-shattering, and heaven-shocking primordial palm. That vast palm power had yet to be unleashed, but the sky above the battlefield was already rumbling with thunder and clouds shattering and the sky collapsing. Upon seeing this, Child Jian's first reaction was to dodge, but just as he was about to activate the true power in his legs, he realized that his opponent's palm had actually released a whirlpool of energy, which produced a pulling force, causing his movements to become severely sluggish. There's such a thing? Blade Runner had fought against at least 80 experts, if not 100, but he had never seen anyone who could use an attack-type skill at the same time and also use a control-type skill with the same hand. However, he had finally seen it today. Feng Bujue was such a person. The skills that Brother Ju used today were all skills that he had grasped after understanding. In other words, when he used a skill, he was not running a set of programs that were preset by the system. Instead, he was running a set of programs that he had rewritten himself. Although in the beginning, Feng Bujue had only copied the preset skills that were preset by the system, With his personality, it was obvious that he would not be satisfied with the current situation just because this ability was strong. After a few months of development, Brother Ju was already able to combine some skills, greatly increasing their power and tactical effectiveness. Right now, the earth-shattering and heaven-shocking primordial palm that he was using was added with a set of C-grade skill, reverse wind-eye codes. Therefore, during the charging stage, there was an additional special effect that could attract the enemy. After about a second of hesitation, Blade Runner knew that not only would he not be able to dodge, he had also missed the best time to counter the attack. Helpless, he could only shout and force out his spirit energy. He used his only defensive skill, Cloud Armor. This was an A-grade skill that used sword energy to create an energy armor. It did not have any fancy special effects, and its tactical effectiveness was average, but it was useful. Boom! The palm landed, and the cloud armor blocked it. After a short contact, Child Jian retreated. Even though he had already neutralized most of the power from the attack, he still coughed up blood after he was hit. Using this gap, Feng Bujue clenched his fists and pulled back the Z-wrench, turning it into nunchaku form. Then, he chased after his opponent. As for Child Jian, he did not lose his momentum because of his injury. When he retreated, he had already adjusted his breathing and was prepared to face his opponent's next attack. At that moment, when he saw his brother Bujue chasing after him, Child Jian was not shocked. Instead, he smiled. He pointed his sword and condensed his chi at the tip of his sword. A red light suddenly appeared on his sword. Blood stains the pugilistic world. With a shout, he used his ultimate skill. Blood Stains the Pugilistic World had strange changes. It contained the essence of Blade Runner's swordsmanship. It could be said that one move turned into 10,000 moves, and 10,000 moves turned into one move. Even though this move had lost to Raw Yu's Remnant Wind Sword Shadow, Demon Sword Frenzy, at that time, Raw Yu was in the Phoenix Death, Phoenix Life state, which could not be used again. Her combat power was far beyond her normal state, and she could not be measured by normal standards. At that moment, Feng Bujue did not have any transformation skills. In front of this S-grade skill, he had no advantage. However, he still resolutely rushed toward the red light in front of him, as if he was not worried about Child Jian's ultimate skill. Pooh! The sword fell, and the skin and flesh were torn. But it was only the skin and flesh that were torn. The moment the sword in his hand cut Brother Bujue, Blade Runner was shocked. Of course, he should be shocked, because his blood stains the pugilistic world, which was enough to turn people into minced meat and blood mist, only caused a light injury after hitting the target. It did not even break the opponent's bones. This little blood can't stain the pugilistic world red. After a breath, Feng Bujue, who had been hit in the shoulder, suddenly teleported behind Child Jian, and even used a very relaxed tone to provoke him. This also made Blade Runner believe that this scene was not a trick. Feng Bujue really took the blood stains the pugilistic world, and only suffered a light injury. Moreover, he immediately teleported after being hit. As expected, Child Jian's thoughts flashed. He used some kind of other person's skill to neutralize my move. His inference was completely correct. Even though this skill required 1,200 stamina points to activate, the effect was really overpowered. It was a skill that was very suitable for Brother Bujue's current fighting style. Feng Bujue, who had arrived behind Child Jian, held a nunchaku that was already at 58% charged. Using the 4-second double attack speed bonus, he raised his hands and greeted Child Jian with a series of attacks. For a moment, the shadow of the staff swallowed the sun and moon, and the fighting spirit covered the wind and dust. The high-speed dual attribute combo landed on Blade Runner's back like a storm. Even though Child Jian managed to turn around in time to react, in the first 3 seconds, he was already at a disadvantage. It had to be said that Feng Bujue's attack was very smart and efficient. The moment he attacked, Child Jian had just finished using blood in pugilistic world, so his stamina were in a state where he had not recovered yet. In this state, when he was ambushed from behind, No matter how fast his reflexes were, his body would not be able to react in time. If the primordial palm of shattering earth relied on its power to take down a little bit of the enemy's life points, then this combo relied on the superiority of the skill to bully the enemy. Translator's thoughts: lonely tree, lonely tree, lonely tree, sigh. Even though I know I might not be able to defeat him, the gap between us has already reached such a stage. Flashes of sword, whose life points were about to hit rock bottom, thought to himself as he parried the follow-up attacks from his opponent. Is this my limit? With that thought in mind, Child Jian could not help but feel sad. Meng Jingchan, Su Huai Shang, Oda Ai, Li Ruoyu. Other than Phantom Dawn, Shiva, and other monsters that were completely different from him, even in the field of swords, there were too many existences that he was afraid of. Feng Bujue, who had been around the same age as him, had moved further and further away from him. Now, when he looked again, he could not even see the man's back anymore. The cruel reality, the pride of a swordsman, caused him to be filled with sadness and despair. At that moment, Child Jian was filled with emotion. He channeled his will into the sword, and the sword chanted, "Unpardonable." As the voice rose, the sword followed. The power of the sword was unprecedented. Young, hard, dominating, absolute. Traceless strike. The second chant led to the second style. Soft, mysterious, easy. Unsharpened strike. When the third style was used, Feng Bujue, who had been suppressing Child Jian, was forced to retreat about 10 feet. At the same time, the sword in Child Jian's hand, the blade of the sword had turned from a physical object into something that looked like energy. Formless strike. After chanting the 4 sentences, a spiritual martial weapon was formed in the shape of the sword in young Master Jian's hand. The name of the sword was Void. Everything was void. Even the description of the sword was blank. Only a swordsman who had reached the void level could obtain it. Perhaps this was fate. In the previous battle between Flashes of Sword and Feng Bujue, it was at the brink of death that Feng Bujue yelled out his own poetic proclamation and obtained the sorcery weapon. But this time, it was Flashes of Sword, who had lost his temper, who chanted the poetic proclamation and used it to obtain the sorcery weapon and reach a whole new level. Again, after Blade Runner's combat power had increased, he did not relax. After the 4 moves, he only observed and experienced his current state. Then, he immediately shouted and attacked again. He knew very well that Feng Bujue's real strength was far more than what he had shown so far. Not to mention other things, just his triple transformation in the previous round was enough to change the outcome of the battle. Therefore, Child Jian did not plan to give Feng Bujue a chance to catch his breath. He immediately chased after him with his sword. Let's do it! Brother Ju was not to be outdone. Through the data perspective, Feng Bujue could clearly see Child Jian's improvement. To him, this was a good opportunity. How to defeat a top expert without using any consumable items or the Chuck Norris series of abilities was a problem that Feng Bujue had to solve in the next few rounds of the competition. With that in mind, Flashes of Sword was a hurdle that he had to overcome. Clang! At that moment, the sword came and the staff came. The sound of the collision pierced through the air. The battle started again, and the level of the battle rose again. The shadows of the battle intersected, and dust filled the eyes. Limitless, Child Jian was like the incarnation of the sword. Selfless, unintentional, and traceless. His sword was edgeless, and his intent was formless. He killed without mercy. He was the nemesis of zero-time difference calculations. Facing such an unpredictable opponent, Feng Bujue could not make the first move. He could only rely on his reaction and speed to fight. Therefore, even though the price was high, Brother Ju continued to activate Body Enhancement Spell, Extreme. He used his self-created dual-section staff technique to fight head-on with his opponent. The two of them clashed with their short weapons, and their figures were locked in battle. They went up to the sky and down to the ground. Thousands of attacks were exchanged. Light and shadow scattered everywhere. The sound of battle echoed. Spiritual energy clashed. They were evenly matched. In this battle, let alone the audience, even the experts who were watching the battle were mesmerized by the carefree battle. They could not even say a word. They could not take their eyes off the battle for even half a second. And the two people in the arena were getting more and more engrossed in the battle. Without the sword, they were as fast as lightning. They were as fierce as thunder. Strange techniques were born one after another. Dual staff, cold flames turned into ice. Blazing waves were like fire. Dual extreme killing. Their moves were fierce and violent. The extreme swordsman went crazy with martial arts. One used the sword to prove his heart and chase his destined enemy. The other used a clear mirror and still water to achieve his own good fortune. This was a battle between a tiger and a dragon. The dark clouds shocked the world and shook the world. The vast ocean of sand seemed to be stirred up by this battle. Suddenly, the wind and sand rose. The clouds turned and the hills moved. Finally, after 15 minutes of battle, another change occurred. Although it's satisfying, it seems that it's time to end it, Child Jian said. He suddenly swung his sword and stopped the attack. Yeah, on the other side, Feng Bujue took advantage of the situation and retreated several feet away from his opponent. He said bluntly, "If we continue fighting, I'm going to self-destruct because body enhancement spell, extreme, increase the user's strength and speed proportionally, and the greater the increase, the greater the loss." Brother Ju's HP was even lower than Child Jian's. One could imagine how much pressure Brother Ju was under to keep up with limitless Child Jian's speed. "Let's do it." 2 seconds later, young Master Sword continued. "Make your move. I know, you at least have a decisive move." "How do you know I have one?" Feng Bujue asked. "Because you are Feng Bujue," Child Jian said in a matter-of-fact tone. "Yes." Brother Ju answered with a bitter smile on his face. "Yes, you're right. Because I am Feng Bujue." When he said the last word, he suddenly threw the nunchaku in his hand at his opponent. Then he raised both of his hands, crossed his wrists in front of his eyes, and extended both of his index and middle fingers. When he did this, 2 poker cards glowing with a black glow appeared between his fingers. Humph, good timing. Looking at the nunchaku that came at him like lightning, Child Jian's lips curled up, and he thought to himself, "To surpass you or to fulfill your wish, it all depends on this move." Just as he made up his mind, the ultimate move was completed. At that moment, the blade of the long sword in Child Jian's hand completely disappeared, and a cylindrical territory appeared around him. Wanxiang in 1,000 forms disappeared, leaving only the shadow of Mad Trace's sword. In this swordless territory, other than Blade Runner himself, everything else was dominated by the will of the sword. Wherever the sword energy was, the power would rise from the ground, and the sand would tremble violently. Just as Brother Ju's nunchaku flew into the territory, they were sent flying by an invisible force. They couldn't even touch Child Jian, much less hurt him. However, Feng Bujue himself followed behind the nunchaku and entered the swordless territory, and he wasn't sent flying. This was because he had used the 4th special effect of the Exodia prison set, Seal Destroyer, to ignore the defensive special effect of Child Jian's move. Therefore, he was able to pass this stage. However, the swordless territory was a combination of offense and defense. Even if he passed the defense, what welcomed Brother Ju was the attack of the sword energy. "Give me your life." Seeing the enemy close in, Child Jian did not hold back and used all his moves to kill him. Humph! Feng Bujue was not going to hold back. As the sword energy gathered around him, he also used his trump card. It was the combination of the 3 profound skills of Wicked King's Infernal Flame, Flying Dragon Fist, and Card Assassination. He named it Wicked King's Dragon Slaughter. Chapter 1505. 10,000 miles of wild sand sealing sword technique. Blood stains the pugilistic world, leaving no life. Extreme move against extreme move. Wild evil move. War indomitable sword intent. At that moment, a black light flashed through the air and a killer figure flashed in. When the fighting energy faded, The two of them were facing each other with their backs facing each other. The outcome of the fated battle had been decided here. Phew. Blade Runner looked at the sky and let out a long breath. Then he said slowly, "You're still better than me." At the same time, Feng Bujue, who was standing several meters behind him and facing away from him, reached out without raising his head, as if he had eyes on his shoulders, and caught the nunchaku that fell from the sky. Feng Bujue continued, "You're just a little better than me." This statement should be Brother Ju's affirmation of young Master Sword, because he admitted that the other party was only slightly better than him, but he did not correct him by saying that he was only slightly better than him. However, after 2 seconds of silence, Child Jian smiled bitterly and said, "You're lying to me." Huh. Feng Bujue also laughed. I gave you a way out, but you didn't want it." At this moment, both of them knew that in the last exchange of moves, the winner had already been decided long before they made their moves. At the moment when he threw out the nunchaku, Feng Bujue calculated all the possibilities that would happen next. He even calculated the details of how high the nunchaku would fly after entering the swordless domain, how long it would fly, and where it would land. This meant that he had completely analyzed Child Jian's moves and the strength of the sword energy in the swordless domain. He only made the move when he was fully confident. "There's no need for that." Young Master Jian shook his head and replied, "You've already given me enough." As soon as he finished speaking, the injuries on his body finally broke out. In a split second, a puff sound was heard, and a bloody mist spurted out from the countless cracks on his body. Blood reflected the red clouds in the sky and dyed the yellow sand on the ground. The sword was defeated, and the Blade Runner fell to the ground, disappearing into light. When he fell, his face was filled with relief, at least for Child Jian. Even if his journey to the summit ended in this battle, he would have no regrets. It's not easy. As soon as he returned to the spectator space, Feng Bujue stretched his voice and howled in a tone that sounded like he had just been engaged in heavy physical labor for a long time. "I've racked my brains. Are you urging us to praise you?" Ruoyu looked at him and said, "Huh, how is that possible?" Brother Ju laughed and glanced at the crowd. "I don't expect you guys to praise me, so I took the initiative to show off my achievements and emphasize the fact that I worked hard. Okay. To be honest, this battle was really beautiful." In the end, Misson still gave a fair comment. "It's rare to see you in a fair and square battle without resorting to any tricks, and your opponent is that flashes of sword. But I still don't quite understand." Snow had another question at this time. He looked at Brother Ju and said, "Why didn't you use Chuck Norris's razor?" He paused and added, "In the first few rounds of the competition, it's fine if you don't use it. Those opponents don't have the strength to force you to use that item. But in the last round against Autumn Wind, it seemed to be a little difficult, right? And just now, if you had shaved your head in the opening 30 seconds, you would have won immediately, right? TSK, do I need you to tell me that?" Feng Bujue's response was not unexpected by Snow. It was the kind of response that was particularly arrogant. "This is a strategy, understand? A strategy." "So," Snow narrowed his eyes and said, "What kind of strategy is it?" He showed a rather helpless expression. "In the last round, when you fought Autumn Wind, you forced yourself to sell your blood and use 3 transformations. This round, insisting on not using the razor, is also a strategy. Is it true? Don't you think you're quite smart? Think about it yourself." Feng Bujue immediately looked at Snow with a contemptuous gaze and said, "Also, don't you think you're asking too many questions? Who gave you the right to ask so many questions? The final right to ask questions in this team belongs to Wang Tanji, don't you know?" In the face of such cheap power, Snow had nothing to say. Wait a minute. At this time, Xiaoling suddenly showed a look of realization. "So, after we fought Autumn Wind in the last round, Brother Ju, this strategy that you talked about, was it true?" Hey, your reaction arc is a little long." Brother Ju said, "Could it be that you're pregnant?" "Well, it's possible." Xiaoling did not get the point of this sentence, which was that his wife had become stupid. He even nodded thoughtfully. Then he was beaten by his wife. Pregnant my ass. Xiao Ling raised her hand and gave Xiao Tan a chestnut. Then she turned to Brother Ju and said, "What does this have to do with my reaction arc? What you said last time, no matter how I look at it, it sounds like an excuse after you've gone too far. Who would really think about it? Okay. Then blame me." Feng Bujue spread his hands and looked at everyone again. "So now you all know, right? There is a strategic meaning behind my actions. Now that you know, it's not a difficult strategy to guess." Xiao Ling was quick-witted. After confirming that Brother Ju's so-called strategic meaning was not nonsense, she said the correct explanation almost without hesitation. To put it bluntly, this is to send some kind of message to the players of the other teams, right? After her reminder, everyone began to realize what was going on. "Oh." Snow slapped his forehead and said to Brother Ju with his eyes wide open, "So, during the match with Autumn Wind, you wanted to tell others that Feng Bujue can use the skills of other players?" "To be exact," Brother Ju replied, "what I wanted to convey was the message that Feng Bujue can use the skills seen in the match for his own use. So, the 3 transformations you used in that match were all skills used by the players of the other teams in this S3 competition. And they were all transformations that left a deep impression and were easy to recognize visually." Ruoyu followed his train of thought. "That's right," Feng Bujue added. "There was a reason I used those 3 transformations. If it was purely to win, I would have used Soul's Advent as well." "Oh." When Su Huaishang heard that, her expression shifted slightly. "You can even use Soul's Advent?" "Yes," Feng Bujue replied. "Actually, most of the S-grade skills are not that complicated. The reason these skills are so high level is because they require a lot of energy when they are created." He paused for half a second before continuing. "Of course, there are some skills that I cannot learn or use, like Descent of the War Demon, which has lost its source of power, and Phantom Dawn's left and right hands, which only an official level NPC can use after a blood sacrifice." "Wait a minute." The next second, Roa, you said, "We can talk about how many skills you can learn later. But the question now is, what is the purpose of your strategy? Why do you want the other teams to know that you can use other people's skills?" "It's very simple," Brother Ju shrugged. "To create a psychological barrier for them in the upcoming competition. In other words," Su Huaishang mumbled, "they will not dare to use their powerful skills in the competition due to their fear of you." "Yes," Feng Bujue added, "especially those teams who have the hope of winning the competition. They, or the team behind them, will have to consider the possibility of running into me in the next round. To prevent their trump cards from being used against them in the future, they will have to make adjustments in terms of their formation, tactics, skills, and so on." Hearing this, Inuetchin was confused. But even so, the gap between the strong teams and the casual players will not be closed. They will win the competition that they are supposed to win. They will not lose just because they have a few trump cards up their sleeves. She pouted. "Your strategy will at most affect the outcome of the competition between the strong teams. Furthermore, for us, this is not beneficial at all. In fact, it will force the strong teams to keep their trump cards up until they run into us." "No, that's not right." 1 second later, before Brother Ju could answer, Ruo, you said with a thoughtful expression, "This strategy is very useful." And Yuetchin was confused. "What do you mean?" "Let me explain it to you." Feng Bujue smiled at Ruoyu with a smug look on his face. Then he looked at the others and said, "First of all, regarding the competition between the strong teams and the weak teams, I did not expect the seeded teams to lose to the casual players because of the restriction that I set up. However, in order to guard against me, the difficulty of winning the competition will be increased. The process will be more complicated because of that." In order to hide some things, more things were exposed instead," Snow said in a timely manner. Feng Bujue did not answer him, but he tossed him an affirmative gaze and continued. "Secondly, in a situation where 2 strong players are fighting each other, that is even less of a problem. In a battle between 2 strong players of similar strength, neither side will increase the risk of the entire competition for the sake of a victory that has yet to come. Taking a step back, even if they really want to hide something, they might not have the power to do so. That's true, and Yueqin nodded. Hiding a trump card is indeed something that can only be done when there is a certain gap between the strength of the two teams. So, the saying that let the strong teams keep their trump cards up until they run into us doesn't exist. Feng Bujue shrugged and continued. When the two strong teams meet, they will still use their trump cards as usual. Think about it this way. And Yueqin said again, if the other team ignores you from the beginning and pretends that they don't know that you can learn other people's skills, then they could just fight as they should. Wouldn't that be fine? That's right, Feng Bujue said with a smile. But that's impossible. He's right, that's impossible. Many people should have heard of this example. A person could easily jump over a 2-meter wide stream, but when he came to a canyon that was exactly the same width as the stream, he had the illusion that the canyon was wider than the stream and that he might not be able to jump over it. This was the effect of psychological pressure on people. In this world, not only did the unknown bring fear, but the known could also be used to create fear. The timer on the bomb, the food reserves in the enclosed space, the battery on the mobile phone that had almost run out, the age of the user. These visible and knowable things all belong to the latter. There were many things that did not matter when one did not know them, but once one knew them, psychological pressure would form. Humans would be affected by this kind of pressure. It would cause fear, retreat, and change. Feng Bujue's first strategy was a psychological pressure method. If the other seeded teams did not know that he could learn other people's skills, then nothing would happen to them. But once they found out, it was impossible for them to do nothing. Even if someone told them to just play as usual and ignore this matter, when it came to the actual competition, especially when they were fighting against casual teams that were weaker than them, they would still overdo it due to this psychological pressure. The result was just as Snow said, to hide something, they ended up exposing more. Okay, I get what you mean. And Yueqin thought about it and said, I have a few reasons why you waited until the 10th round to do this. Then, she asked, what is the strategic meaning behind your insistence on not using Chuck Norris's razor? It is because of Phantom Dawn, Su Huaishang suddenly interjected. As the only professional player in the guild, the importance she attached to an opponent like Phantom Dawn was self-explanatory. Therefore, she came up with this idea at the first moment and came up with this logical speculation. Yes. Feng Bujue nodded and turned to Su Huaishang. After all, the kid is the only person I know who can see through data other than myself. Even though he has not shown any sign of learning other people's skills, he has been in possession of data view for a much longer time than I have. It is hard to tell whether he is purposely hiding some kind of power that is similar to mine or even stronger. Wait a minute. Hearing that, Snow said, since he can see through data, doesn't it make the same difference whether you use it or not? As long as you put it in your inventory, you will be able to see it. That will be fine, Feng Bujue said. As long as I do not take it out to use, the only thing he will see is the description of the special effect to give you a cool appearance. He will not know anything about it. Snow thought about it. Indeed, in all the videos that were publicly available at Thriller Paradise, there was no video of Brother Ju shaving his head in battle. He himself had only found out about the actual effect of the razor after joining Underworld Frontline from his teammates. Based on the description of the item, he had no idea what it was. You have a point, Snow said as he thought about it. But to guard against him alone, you have gone to this extent from a certain perspective. Does this mean that you have been influenced by the psychological pressure exerted by Phantom Dawn? Of course not. Feng Bujue stared at him with his dead fish eyes. Phantom Dawn has never been a psychological obstacle. From the beginning to the end, he has been an objective presence and a problem that cannot be avoided. Every team or individual who wants to win the competition has to face him and find a practical solution. From this perspective, everything that I have done so far is natural, and I will continue to do these things until I face him in battle. At this point, he paused and then changed the topic. Of course, if we have to talk about psychological warfare, the kid did try something similar. You mean, Ruai, you understood what Brother Ju was getting at. The way he purposely acted when he was fighting against Shiva? Brother Ju nodded. That kind of childish method of showing off might sound clumsy and unnecessary to me, but generally speaking, that is his way of sending a message. He titled his head and continued. Everyone knows that he is impossibly strong, so there's no need for him to use this kind of method to pressure people. The more logical explanation is that the kid wants to send a message to a certain group or person. For example, me, I'm that strong. You'd better wash your neck clean and wait for me. Snow muttered to himself for 2 seconds before continuing. If someone else were to make this deduction, I might say that they feel good about themselves. But since it's you, I always feel that no matter how big the grudge there can be, all right, if he has any kind of grudge, I will deal with it. Furthermore, how do you know that is not another part of my strategy? Feng Bujue raised his brow. In any case, what you should be thinking about now is not the grudge between me and Phantom Dawn, but how to deal with that pair of siblings in the upcoming battle. Chapter 1506. The match will begin in 30 seconds. As the system announced, the players from both sides entered the arena. Just as Feng Bujue had predicted in the spectator space, World of Martial Arts sent out the brother-sister duo of Not a Scaredy Cat and Butinga. But please note that this prediction was made by Feng Bujue in the spectator space, and not the original prediction that he made before the match. I did not expect that I would run into you in the Battle of the Vanguards. That was what he had said to Child Jian, which meant that he had already admitted that he had made a mistake in his judgment. Then, what was Brother Ju's original prediction? Feng Bujue had thought that World of Martial Arts would send out Bladeless Swordsman for the first round, and Child Jian and Not a Scaredy Cat for the second round. From World of Martial Arts perspective, if Hell Frontline sent out a lineup that started from the weakest to the strongest, then with their lineup, there was a high chance that they would be able to take a 2-0 lead at the start of the match. Even if Hell Frontline sent out their main force for the first 2 rounds, it was not like they had no chance of winning. At the very least, they would be able to win the first 2 rounds. Then, as long as World of Martial Arts used Butinga to snipe Snow in one of the later rounds, then they would have the chance to advance to the next round. However, the calculation that Brother Ju had made for World of Martial Arts did not turn into reality. That was because World of Martial Arts was calculating something else. This might sound a little unbelievable, but after the matchmaking list was announced, World of Martial Arts immediately called for an internal meeting. When the meeting ended, they made the decision to give up on advancing to the next round. The reason for giving up was very simple. After the management, players, and data analysis team discussed and analyzed the situation, they all came to the same conclusion that with World of Martial Arts' current lineup, no matter how great of an advantage they obtained in terms of lineup, the hope of getting 3 points from Hell Frontline was very slim. If there were no accidents, World of Martial Arts' journey to S3 would come to an end. Once they came to this conclusion, World of Martial Arts' calculation of the score was naturally different. They did not need to be like Mountain River in the previous round and set up a formation for the extremely low possibility of them advancing. They only needed to satisfy 2 points. 1, they had to get at least 1 point in the overall score to avoid the embarrassment of being swept clean. 2, they had to use the tournament platform to showcase their players and increase their popularity. Hence, in the first 3 rounds, World of Martial Arts arranged the lineup of Blade Runner, Not a Scaredy Cat, and Butinga, and Bladeless Swordsman. This formation was undoubtedly a formation that gave up on the hope of advancing to the next round. They did not hope to win the last 2 rounds, but only hoped to score points in the first 3 rounds and ensure that the 4 popular experts in the team could enter the arena. Even though Feng Bujue immediately realized this after he fought the Vanguard battle, the lineup was submitted 10 minutes before the start of the match. A person's judgment could be changed, but the lineup could not. Therefore, in this round, it was Snow and Wang Tanji against Not a Scaredy Cat and Butinga. Brother Ju originally planned to use Xiao Tan's crowd control ability and Snow's various weapons to bully the 2 melee players, but after Child Jian switched to Xiao Bu, the feasibility of this tactic became questionable. There must be someone who remembered that in round S1, Wang Tanji and Butinga had fought against each other once. At the time, even though Xiao Tan won, even he had to admit that he was really lucky. In that battle of the bug, be it the weather, the pitch-black night, or the terrain, the towering stone forest, it was very disadvantageous for Buchinga, who specialized in marksmanship. Due to the low level of the players during round S1, their abilities were limited, so the advantages and disadvantages brought by the environment were even more obvious. If one looked at this duel without these third-party factors, it was not hard to see that Buchinga was actually a player who countered Xiao Tan. In fact, not only Xiao Tan, Buchinga's Thunder Boomerang could be said to be the nemesis of all players who specialized in stealth and assassination. Before him, there was no room for agility to restrain him. The only ones who could counter him were players like Great Brahma or Long Aomin, but unfortunately, Snow and Xiao Tan were not that type. You've seen the recording of my duel with Buchinga, right? When Xiao Tan said this to Snow, the latter was busy building machinery. At that moment, the preparation time was not over yet. Due to the presence of a player who specialized in marksmanship and the fact that they were in a desert, Xiao Tan and the others did not follow their original plan to pull away from their opponent. Instead, they started to prepare where they were. Of course, I've seen it. Snow lowered his head and busied himself as he replied. I've also watched his matches in round S2 and S3. I can see that compared to when he was in Star, he is much stronger now. He paused and raised his eyes slightly. And he's your nemesis. Xiao Tan was silent for a few seconds. During this time, he seemed to have made up his mind about something. Then he opened his mouth and said, Snow, I have an idea. What is it? Snow replied, Can you help me hold him back for a while? Xiao Tan asked, Fight for 2 minutes. Huh? Although Snow did not stop what he was doing, he raised his head. He looked at Xiao Tan and said in English, Dude, are you kidding me? It was understandable that he had such a reaction. Xiao Tan was supposed to help him fight for time. Now, he actually suggested that he, a person who could barely fight head-on, should instead help his teammate fight for time. This could no longer be said to be forcing him to do something against his will. This was practically asking him to die. Please, just 2 minutes. Think of something. After Xiao Tan finished speaking, he did not give the other party any room to say anything. In a flash, he disappeared without a trace. Mother F.A. beep. Snow looked at the empty desert in front of him and cursed in English. While he was shocked, he could not help but complain in his heart. I thought only Feng Bujue would betray his teammate at the last minute. I didn't expect you, Wang Tanji, to betray the revolutionary friendship that we've worked so hard to build. Are there any good people in Hell's front line? Who can I trust in this kind of world in the future? Although he complained, he still had to think of a way. Snow was definitely not a person who would sit and wait for death. He did not really think that he had been betrayed. He knew very well. Xiao Tan must have a good reason for doing this. So, in these 2 minutes, even if he had to risk his life, he had to fight for his teammate. Chapter 1507. 5, 4, 3. When the countdown rang in everyone's ears, Snow's construct summoning spell, out-of-control experiment, was ready. As soon as he entered the battlefield, Snow had already started to prepare for this skill. Even if Xiao Tan suddenly made an outrageous request a few seconds later, the short 30 seconds of preparation time did not allow Snow to change his mind. Therefore, he could only brace himself and finish the task at hand. 2. 1. The barrier was about to disappear, and Snow's heart was in his throat. The first round of confrontation was very crucial. If his skill was effective, then there would be hope for him to hold on, but if he was unlucky, he would probably be killed and turn into white light within 5 seconds. Fight! In the next second, the system announced the official start of the match. As soon as the barrier was removed, Buchinga's Thunder Boomerang left his hand and spun towards Snow. At the same time the spiritual ability weapon left his hand, Buchinga's hands took out 2 submachine guns and launched a barrage of bullets at the enemy. Logically speaking, with Snow's physical skills, he would definitely be injured under this kind of attack. However, what happened next was those bullets that arrived earlier than the boomerang all froze in midair when they flew near Snow. Then, they quickly and vertically fell to the ground. At that moment, Unafraid, who was charging forward, quickly stopped her advance. Her combat instincts told her that she needed to observe this place for a while before she could enter. This guy, could he be an expert who can use territory? That was naturally impossible. However, there was indeed a territory around Snow at that moment. The true face of this territory was out-of-control experiment. This was a skill that would continue to exist once it was completed. It was similar to field magic. The standard for its completion was experiment symbol. According to the skill description, the activation of an out-of-control experiment required the sacrifice of a symbol, and this symbol had to be an artifact. Of course, man-made objects covered a wide range. Generally speaking, as long as it was built or processed by players, it would meet this standard. For example, a paper crane, a wooden bow, or a plate of shredded pork with garlic sauce, anything would do. However, it didn't mean that you could just use chewed gum as a symbol. This was because the quality, nature, processing difficulty, and other factors of the symbol would affect the effect of the skill. There is no doubt that there would be a difference in strength between rolling a piece of paper into a ball and cutting it into a flower. It was just that, even if he sacrificed something of high quality and difficult to process, he could only guarantee that the effect would be strong, but he couldn't determine what the effect would be. This was because the original description of the skill was randomly generate field effects that are beneficial to the user or disadvantageous to hostile units. In Thriller Paradise, the word random was like a coin. On one side was the word God, and on the other side was the word trap. The result of the toss was metaphysical. Snow had tested this skill many times, but even if he used the exact same symbol to activate the skill, the special effect that appeared each time was different. It could be said that this was truly an out-of-control experiment. Right now, Snow had used the parts created by synthesis, universal parts, and synthesis, special parts, several times. Together with a few special materials, he created a prop called air guitar and used it as a symbol to start the out-of-control experiment. He was very lucky. The special effect this time was gravity, and it was strong enough. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 2 seconds later, with a whirring sound, the thunder boomerang also charged into the field of out-of-control experiment. The kinetic energy of this sorcery weapon was obviously far beyond that of a normal bullet, but even though it did not hover and fall to the ground like normal bullets, its speed and flying height were greatly affected. How big was the effect? It was so big that even with Snow's physical skills, he was able to dodge the attack of the boomerang. Change the battle strategy. Close combat. Follow me. After witnessing this, Sister Not a Scaredy Cat. Oh no. Big Sister Not a Scaredy Cat immediately yelled at her brother. It was a simple and direct sentence. It was an unquestionable order, and it was also a practical and effective battle strategy. At first glance, it seemed like it was a waste to ask Sky Song, a marksmanship specialist, to give up all his long-range skills and join her in a melee battle. However, under such circumstances, it was actually the most efficient and correct method. Just by observing the bullets and the boomerang, Not a Scaredy Cat had been able to discern the range and strength of Snow's territory and come to the conclusion that the two of them would be able to deal with him. Her high combat intelligence and decisiveness even impressed Fong Bujue, who was watching from the observation space. Do they have to change their strategy so quickly? Snow, who was on the battlefield, looked at the siblings who were rushing toward him. He thought to himself, they've only used 2 long-range attacks, and they've changed their strategy so decisively. That's too much. They should at least test the waters a little more. While he was thinking about this, Snow's next skill had been activated. Name, Summoning, Underworld Warrior, Skill Card Attribute. Active Skill, Permanent. Skill Type, Summoning. Effect, randomly summon a warrior from the underworld to fight for you. Cooldown time, 120 minutes. Active time, 10 minutes. Maximum of 1 underworld warrior at a time. Consumption, 30% of maximum spiritual energy value. Learning requirement, Summoning Mastery B. Remark, communicating with the underworld is a very laborious task. That place is like an isolated island with extremely bad cell phone and internet signals. You'll never be able to tell who will pick up your call. If you can find Jim Downing or Alejandro Jones, that's your luck. But if you find Nick Cruz, you'll have to pray for yourself. This was another skill with a randomness to it, but Snow did not have much choice at this time. He could only use this kind of gambling-style method to survive in this terrible situation. Buzz. There was a sound, and a white light appeared. A figure appeared in response to the light and blocked in front of Snow. This warrior from the underworld was the Savage Star's underworld gladiator, the one-eyed giant, Gugiato. He was about 2 meters tall, and his body was as large as a mountain. He wore a reddish-brown underworld robe, and many tusk-like horns protruded from his armor. Before the helmet on his forehead, there was an eye-catching golden eye carved into it. Even though this was a creature summoned through a level B summoning skill, this kind of humanoid summoned creature with a certain degree of intelligence and combat was above average. Without a doubt, it was already at the level of a level A creature. This was the benefit of randomness. Just like Fong Buju's Kaya, randomness allowed him to unleash skills that were beyond the character's current ability. Giant Capture. Once he appeared, Gugiato rushed toward Not a Scaredy Cat, who was closest to him, and he even shouted the name of his ultimate skill. But to his surprise, before he could fully execute his capture, a metal ball that was bigger than his head smashed into his face. Capture your head. Not a Scaredy Cat was a scary woman. Even under the pressure of gravity, her speed and strength were still as ferocious as ever. Facing the giant charging at her, she raised the strange-looking weapon in her hand and swung it at him. With just a normal attack, the man's head was smashed into meat paste. At that moment, the liquid inside the summoned creature's skull splashed out, and a few drops even landed on Snow's face. It seemed to be reminding him that it was his turn soon. I knew this woman's attack power was crazy, but I didn't expect it to be this powerful. Snow's heart was bitter. If he ran, he would die, but if he fought, he would not win. All he could do was keep using skills that would prolong his life and by the time that Xiao Tan needed. Buzz, buzz. In less than a breath, there was another buzz. Snow immediately used Summon, Z virus infected, to summon a second summon creature. He had no other choice. He knew these skills would not be able to stop his opponent, but he had to use them. Because these skills were instantaneous, it would be a waste not to use them. If he used them, you might be able to survive a few more hits. You're so annoying. Seeing that, Not a Scaredy Cat waved the spear of Lucifer, fake, in her hand again. It was a long weapon with a slender body and 2 ends in the shape of a ball and a crescent moon. It attacked the summoned creature before her. If Gugiato was a level A creature, then this Z virus infected was at most a level C creature. To put it bluntly, it was the BW zombie that Brother Jew's team had encountered in Nuka City. Of course, no matter what kind of creature it was, as long as it was large enough and had a certain level of attack power, it would at least be able to buy some time. After the blow, the entire body of the BW zombie that had been hit in the chest was smashed in amidst meat and blood, and it exploded in all directions. As for Snow, he had already taken advantage of the gap in this attack to turn around and slip away in another direction. The negative effect of the uncontrollable experiment would not affect Snow himself. When the enemy was slowed down by gravity, he could still run at full speed. However, even if he had the advantage of gravity, could a level 60 player with a C fighting mastery level who is not afraid of a level 60 player with a S fighting mastery level? The answer was definitely no, but to catch up to him, Not a Scaredy Cat would need some time. Thankfully, Not a Scaredy Cat was not fighting alone. Buchinga had already charged into Snow's territory and surrounded him with his boomerang. At this point, Little Boo naturally would not use any long-range attacks. Under the interference of gravity, close combat was the most reliable. His boomerang was a good weapon that could be used for both close combat and long-range attacks. When he held it in his hand, it was equivalent to a bent blunt blade. Umph! Don't underestimate me. Facing Buchinga, who also did not specialize in fighting, Snow had a certain level of confidence. They were both level 60 players, and neither of them were good at close combat. You still have to move under the pressure of gravity. Do you really think you can one-shot me? With that thought in mind, Snow held the sandbox dweller's hammer in his hand and charged at Butinga, who was blocking his way. Bang! Then, with the sound of metal clashing against metal, Snow fell to his knees. The moment the weapons clashed, the huge force that came from Butinga's hand easily deflected his attack and numbed his entire arm. The remaining force of the boomerang pressed down on Snow's shoulder, making him unable to stand. He was forced to kneel on one knee. Is there a mistake? Snow spat out blood as he complained in his heart. I've watched so many videos. You've never played close combat with anyone in a competition before. What's going on with this power? Could it be some kind of supernatural power passed down in your family? His reasoning was obviously wrong. The truth was very simple. Butinga's fighting mastery had already reached level A. As for why Butinga had not shown his fighting ability in the match, that was easy to explain. His shooting mastery was already level S, so why would he want to learn fighting for no reason? There was no time to think. The killing intent had arrived. Just as Butinga used his boomerang to injure and suppress Snow, not a scaredy cat, who was chasing after them, also arrived. Even though Snow still had a defensive skill, energy shield, that he had not used, he knew very well that activating the skill was like pouring a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. The attack power of this pair of siblings was too strong. A normal defensive skill would not even be able to withstand a few hits from their normal attacks, much less skills. If Snow had some kind of powerful and quick attack skill, perhaps he could find a way to take one of them down with him, because the defense power of those two was quite average. But Snow did not have that kind of ability. He was a tactical player. He should not have rushed into a close combat with his opponent when he had so little time to prepare. The result of a head-on confrontation was what happened before his eyes. Whoosh! At that moment, the spear of Lucifer, fake, broke through the wind and fell. For the sake of caution, not a scaredy cat used the skill, silent revelation attack, fake. She wanted to kill her opponent completely. This should have been a 100% finishing blow, but the result was duong after a strange sound. Not a scaredy cat's attack brushed past Snow's left ear and landed on the ground. This missed attack was definitely not out of not a scaredy cat's will. She had indeed aimed at the back of her opponent's head. Furthermore, even if she had missed, the spear of Lucifer, fake, would not have made such a sound when it hit the sand. What? Just as not a scaredy cat instinctively opened her mouth out of shock and was about to say the classic line that the villains in Dragon Ball often used before they died, Snow seized the opportunity and bent down to roll. He escaped from the pincer attack of the two people from World of Martial Arts. At that moment, Butinga was also dumbfounded because he did not understand what his sister was doing. How did she miss when she was attacking a stationary target at such a distance? The answer actually did not lie with his sister. It was in Snow's hands. Just now, Snow, who was almost certain to die, had used his spiritual weapon, Demon Die. This special spiritual weapon could be used in combination with his title ability, Evil Strong Luck. When the two were used together, as long as the number of points was right, it could create an effect called probability control. It could forcefully change the direction of certain reality. Chapter 1508. The title of Cyber Gambler was obtained by Snow when he was level 50. The reason he used it until now was because of the additional ability of the title, Evil Strong Luck, which was a causality skill. This ability allowed the user to change the probability of certain events in front of their eyes, turning some events with a very low probability into a 100% fact. A simple example would be roulette. There is a saying, in roulette, it was impossible to get the same number twice in a row. Of course, this saying was not accurate. In roulette, it was not that it was impossible to get the same number twice in a row, but it was almost impossible to get the same number twice in a row. Putting aside human factors such as cheating, that kind of probability actually existed. Perhaps it would happen once in 1,000 times, or 10,000 times, or even 100,000 times. No matter what the actual probability was, if one used Evil Strong Luck to spin twice, as long as it was possible in theory, this ability could interfere and control it. Then, How much was this theory worth? Using a coin toss as an example, before the coin was tossed, there was still plenty of room for this theory. When the coin was tossed, this room would start to shrink rapidly, and when the coin landed on the back of a person's hand, the theory would completely disappear. The area that evil strong luck could interfere with was in the space where the theory still existed. Once this space disappeared, it was beyond the interference range because it was no longer controlling an uncertain probability, but rewriting a reality that had already happened. Now, before Not a Scaredy Cat could hit him, Snow had interfered with this matter and changed the probability of Not a Scaredy Cat's attack, missing from 0.001% to 100%. Only then was he able to escape this calamity. Of course, he had to pay a price for doing so. Since it was evil strong luck, it had to be accompanied by an extremely dangerous price. Any interference would bring about a corresponding misfortune backlash. The degree of misfortune was related to the original probability of the event being interfered with. The lower the original probability, the stronger the misfortune backlash, and the faster it would come. For an event like deciding heads and tails of a coin, one would only have to bear misfortune with a 50% probability difference. After materialization, one would fall while walking or choke while eating. However, for an event like drawing the ace of spade from a brand new deck of cards, one would have to bear misfortune with a 149% probability difference. After materialization, one would have to bear misfortune with a 149% probability difference. After materialization, one would have to bear the misfortune of rolling down the stairs or being hit on the head by a falling object. Similarly, there was a price to pay for letting Not a Scaredy Cat brush past him. He had to make up for the difference of 9,999%. With a probability difference of 9%, the misfortune that materialized would be fatal. In a sense, it would have been better if he had been directly killed by the Not a Scaredy Cat, because the misfortune triggered by such an extreme probability would have been very ridiculous. He might have been struck by lightning or choked to death by his own saliva within 10 seconds, and that was something unimaginably unlucky. However, Snow happened to have a way to escape this kind of misfortune, and that was the Devil's Dice. The special effect of this sorcery weapon was very interesting. As long as you roll 3 sixes, you can cancel out the negative effect of a skill, regardless of whether it is cast by another player or yourself. The throw here was not really a toss. After all, this was a game world, so there was no need to go through so much trouble. The player only needed to hold the item in their hand to activate the special effect, and then the system would give them a random number. At this point, some people probably understood what was going on. That's right, the number of the Devil's Dice could be interfered with evil strong luck. Therefore, there was this operation. Snow used evil strong luck on himself to get 3 sixes on the Devil's Dice. Then, he used evil strong luck on the Not a Scaredy Cat to make it miss its skill. Then, he used the special effect of the Devil's Dice to cancel out the misfortune that came from using evil strong luck on the Not a Scaredy Cat. This way, the cost of making the Not a Scaredy Cat miss its skill would be converted into the cost of making 3 sixes on the 3 dice. Even though there was a 538% chance of success, compared to the former, it was much better. At least, there would not be the sudden death of misfortune. For Snow, that was enough. All he needed was 2 minutes, and half of those 2 minutes had already passed. After a short hesitation, the Not a Scaredy Cat said in a low voice, "Don't panic. Kill him again." At the same time, she was filled with energy. She swung her spear again and chased after Snow, who had not gotten up for the second wave of attacks. This time, Snow could not use the same trick to resist. Even though evil strong luck did not have a cooldown, the Devil's Dice did. If he did not use the Devil's Dice to cancel out the negative effect, he would not be able to escape death even if he activated evil strong luck. But in the end, he still activated it. If he did not, he would be killed instantly. If he activated it, he would be killed by misfortune in a few seconds. This was a bitter choice, but the choice was clear. 2 seconds later, the Not a Scaredy Cat's attack missed again, and it landed on the sand. The strange noise was actually the noise created when the attack was affected by the law of causality. After her weapon missed its target, it lost its original nature, so the power it produced was no different from a normal girl using a stick to hit the ground. When a second attack missed, not a scaredy cat was not that surprised anymore. She understood that her opponent must have used some kind of method to interfere with her attack, but there was too little information on Snow, so she had no idea what he had done. Whoosh! Just as not a scaredy cat's attack missed, Tinga came from the side. The boomerang in his hand cut through the wind, and he aimed at Snow's head and swung it down. Sigh, so be it. At that moment, Snow really gave up. He was a frivolous, cold, and even cold-blooded person. Even if he lost his composure occasionally, it would only happen when he was dealing with his brother Jew. For someone like Snow, if you expected him to break through some kind of limit or go all out to counterattack in this kind of situation, that was not almost impossible, but definitely impossible. Hiss! The next second, amidst the sandstorm, there was the sound of wind brushing against the willow. The wind was like a blade, and the body was like a willow. When the blood sprayed out and splattered on the sand, the expression on Tinga's face was rather wooden. He looked at his body that was sliced diagonally from his left shoulder to his right rib. He was cut into two halves. Even when the two halves of his body collapsed and disappeared into light, he had no idea what had happened. What? Not a scaredy cat, who saw this, was scared. A chill crawled through her body, and the word fear coursed through her veins like adrenaline. But before she could feel that fear, her body was cut in half, just like Tinga. The only difference was that she was cut in half horizontally. Just as the audience looked at this incomprehensible situation with shock and confusion, another change happened. There was a flash of lightning deep inside the clouds, and with a boom, a bolt of lightning struck Snow, who was lying on the ground, and turned him into ash. Now, even the casters did not know what to say. In just 5 seconds, all 3 players on the battlefield had died. 2 of them had their bodies mysteriously torn apart, and 1 had been struck to death by lightning. No one knew what to say. At that moment, the only thing that could be confirmed was that the score had changed to 2 o'clock. In other words, the system had confirmed that Hell Frontline had won this battle. What happened? At the same time, inside Regulation's meeting room, Understanding Death moved his gaze away from the screen with confusion and turned to look at Phantom Dawn. Not only him, the other members in the meeting room and the workers who were there to watch the game, since Regulation did not have a by this time, the data analysis team from the studio had come to watch the live stream of the members, all turned to Phantom Dawn with an inquiring look. At that moment, Phantom Dawn's face was also serious. After a few seconds, he replied, "I only saw a small part of it." He paused. There was something that moved very fast. Perhaps it was a person. If it was a person, then it should be Wang Tanji. He bit on his nails and thought for 2 seconds. In any case, there was something like this. When Tinga was about to kill Snow, it ran over from afar and killed Tinga in passing. Then it continued to run forward and left the range that the screen could capture. 1 second later, it turned back from the direction that it had left and killed Tinga in passing. Hey, lying drunk put on his half-smile. What do you mean by in passing? If it was really Wang Tanji, then let's call it a surprise attack. No, it's not like that, Phantom Dawn said. Charging at the target accurately, killing it, and then turning to another target is called a surprise attack. Reaching out to cut the target open when passing by. That is called in passing, huh? Lying drunk used a modal particle to show that he did not understand. It's hard to say for now. After all, the camera has been focused on the 3 of them. We'll have to wait for the video to be released and see what happened from Wang Tanji's perspective. But if that thing earlier was really Wang Tanji, then in the future, he will become an existence that will be difficult to deal with even for us. For once, Phantom Dawn used a serious tone to say the power that he showed in this match. If he uses it in a 2v2 match, even if I am there, I will still lose. Once that was said, the people in the meeting room could not sit still anymore. What is going on? Yi, who sat next to Phantom Dawn, asked with a frown. What is his power? Like I said, I only saw a small part of it. Phantom Dawn narrowed his eyes, and what I saw was not a moving Wang Tanji or anything else. What I saw was the trace that this thing left behind when it moved, this trace. I did not see it, Brother Chan interrupted. He raised his eyes to look at the people around him. Other than Phantom Dawn, did anyone else see it? Of course, none of you saw it, Phantom Dawn said. Because the thing moved so fast, the various media in the physical world did not even have the time to react to its movement before it passed by. However, from the perspective of pure data, one can still see a trace of it. It looks like a very, very thin thread. If one did not look closely, one would not have noticed it. So, you mean, understanding death, try to wrap his head around this. What happened earlier might have been Wang Tanji used a speed that no one could see, and while he was moving, he casually killed the two from Jianghu. Yes, it is like you're sitting on a speeding train, and a sharp blade poked out from the window to slash at a person standing next to the train tracks, Phantom Dawn replied. Then, Brother Chan continued. Can I speculate this way? Before the barrier disappeared, Wang Tanji abandoned his teammates and ran away on his own because he was preparing to activate this power? That is what I think as well, Phantom Dawn said. But whether it is true or not, we will have to watch the recording to confirm. Brother Chan thought about it and took a swig of the wine. This skill, you really cannot deal with it? He paused for half a second before adding, even if it is extreme speed, it might still be possible to deal with it, right? For example, using a space-time ability or a quick recover. There is no such thing as a quick recover. Phantom Dawn interrupted Brother Chan. I told you, the various mediums in the physical world do not have the time to react to what happened to him. When the system gave us the quick recover status and activated some kind of special effect on us, we might have been cut in half like the two from Jianghu. Wait a minute. Hearing this, Sashimi suddenly thought of something, and he quickly added, if what you said is true, then the two people from pugilistic world shouldn't have died. Their bodies shouldn't have been able to react to the fact that they were chopped up, right? Finally, there is someone who can understand what I'm talking about, Phantom Dawn replied. You are not wrong. The result of that kind of attack should be, the molecules that made up them did not realize that they had been cut in half, so there was no change. Therefore, I suspect that Wang Tanji had already returned to this battlefield many times before the two deaths that we saw happened. Unfortunately, at the time, my attention was also focused on the battle between Snow and the rest, so I did not notice the presence of the traces around us. And in the process of going back and forth, Wang Tanji must have realized that he could not hurt his opponent, so he tried all kinds of methods and finally found a solution. At this point, Phantom Dawn paused for a second and said darkly, to put it simply, he used some kind of method to make himself slow down when he attacked, and that allowed him to complete the kill. Chapter 1509. The match will begin in 30 seconds. 5 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. As the system announcement rang, Martial World and Underworld Frontline entered the preparation stage. On World of Martial Arts side, the person who came up was Bladeless Swordsman. This was a big brother who had been mentioned from time to time since Chapter 101, and every time he would make his presence known on all sorts of ranking boards. He was the second best in World of Martial Arts. Along with Enigma of the Heavens and Blade Runner, he was known as the Laughing Swordsman. He was also one of the founding members of the gaming studio. Just based on his short and powerful ID, as well as his lingering presence, he was enough to be rated as the most familiar stranger in this book. As for Underworld Frontline, I believe you have already guessed that Su Huaishang, who had maintained her perfect attendance so far, had appeared in the lineup for the first 3 matches. Up until now, there had been a total of 11 matches in S3, and Goddess Su had appeared the most in the champion match, and she had won every single one of those matches. It could be said that at this stage, Feng Bujiwa's care for her had already exceeded expectations, be it in terms of appearance or actual performance. Even if Underworld Frontline did not win the championship, Su Huaishang's individual performance was enough to become the MVP in the hearts of the players. For a professional player to be able to maintain such a high level of exposure and competition in a non-gaming studio, her next contract would naturally not be any worse than Red Cherry's. 5. 4. The countdown began. Bladeless Swordsman and Su Huaishang stood where they were, waiting for the barrier to disappear. Whether they were players of the same type or players of the same level, they had no reason to actively distance themselves from each other. The blade was the courage of 100 soldiers. In a battle between blade users, courage was the most important. No one was willing to take the first step back. No one was willing to show weakness in terms of presence. Fight! The moment the match began, the two did not move at all, but in the air, something clashed. It was the will of the blade, killing intent, and also energy. Because these two people's control of energy had already reached the realm of pure azure, the contest had already begun before they had even drawn their blades. Why didn't you use exhaust to slash at me? A few seconds later, the bladeless swordsman spoke first. If you use that move the moment the barrier disappears, I only have a 50% chance of blocking your attack. He was telling the truth. Sometimes, the truth was the best provocation. In other words, Su Huaishang replied calmly, "At that moment, you believe that you had a 50% chance of killing me. You can say that." The bladeless man said, "Of course, I'm not saying that I'm stronger than you, because at that moment, you also have a 50% chance of killing me instantly." Su Huaishang thought for a moment, and then continued. "It seems like you also understand that the battle between you and I is destined to only require one move." "Ha!" The bladeless man laughed. He did not comment on the other party's words. Instead, he said, "It seems like you haven't answered my question." Hearing this, Su Huaishang took a deep breath and said, "There is no need to exhaust yourself." "Oh," the bladeless swordsman asked, "what do you mean?" "Exhaust is just a technique to pursue speed and strength. To deal with you, using these physical methods is meaningless." Su Huaishang replied, "Are you going to use some kind of physical method to determine the winner?" The bladeless swordsman asked back. "Huh." At this moment, Su Huaishang also laughed. Her smile was beautiful, so beautiful that it was indescribable. Just one look was enough to make people fall head over heels for her. However, the bladeless swordsman only felt a chill from this smile. After a moment, Su Huaishang stopped laughing and asked the bladeless swordsman a question. A very dangerous question. "Where's your sword?" This question sounded familiar to some of the players, like flashes of sword and not a scaredy cat, who were watching the match from the spectator channel. They were instantly reminded of the same question that Lin Yin had asked Hyang Shinji at Lin Lu Town. Could it be? Chao Jian broke out in cold sweat. No, perhaps it's just a bluff." Even though not a scaredy cat tried to analyze the situation calmly, her tone showed that she did not have much confidence. Brother Blade has not been to the scenario at Lin Lu Town, and it was not a competition. There is no recording of it. Chao Jian added, "Su Huaishang has no reason to use the words that Yama told Hyang Shinji to bluff, right?" Not a scaredy cat thought about it, and said, "Now that you mention it." While the two of them were talking, the bladeless man on the field also thought for a while and replied, "My blade." As he spoke, he clenched his left hand into a fist, bent his elbow, and gently knocked on his chest. "Is here." "Hey." When he finished, Chao Jian and not a scaredy cat both gasped in shock. "Don't say something like that." "Oh." 2 seconds later, Su Huaishang responded with a slightly disappointed but not surprised expression. After that, she didn't say anything else. Of course, the bladeless swordsman could not accept this. Who would not reveal their own realm after testing their opponent's realm. Then, the bladeless swordsman quickly asked, "Where is your sword?" "Don't." Hearing that, Chao Jian stomped his feet anxiously in the spectator space. "Why are you asking her? What is there to ask?" Unfortunately, his words did not reach the stage, and Su Huaishang had already started to answer. "My saber," Goddess Su said as she slightly lifted her beautiful and fair chin and gestured towards the bladeless man's chest, "is also with you." "That's enough." "That's it." Child Jian roared in the spectator space. Don't say that again. What did you say? The bladeless swordsman once again said the line that Child Jian did not want him to say. Whether it is the sword in your hand or the sword in your heart. Su Huaishang was familiar with the language. You think it is yours, but it is not. Ho, the bladeless swordsman was slightly angered, mainly because he had no idea what the other was talking about. How can it be yours? You two have discussed the script before. At the same second, Child Jian knocked on the invisible force field before him and complained loudly. Can you please speak properly? Stop acting like a wuxia hero. You're going to kill me. You won't understand, even if I tell you. On the stage, Su Huaishang continued. Make your move. When you lose, you'll understand. Humph. The bladeless swordsman scoffed. You're just trying to be mysterious. He gave his comment, and then added, even if you don't say that, I will make my move. Brother Knife's personality and style were much better than He Yang Shinji's. He did not attack halfway through his sentence. He waited for a few seconds after he finished his sentence before he made his move. Instantly, the light of the sword flashed and the shadow of blood bloomed. The wind stirred up the sand, and the wind controlled the sword. A shocking battle. Life and death were decided in an instant. The victory of the two top swordsmen did not require a second move. With similar fighting styles, the gap between them would be obvious and insurmountable. When the blood spilled in the wind, the bladeless swordsman laughed again. This time, his laugh was heroic, but it was also bitter. Ha! So this is the sword skill of the metaphysical. The bladeless swordsman said with a laugh. I even used the word bladeless in my name, but in reality, I seem to have gotten something completely wrong. While he was talking, Su Huaishang had already turned around to look at the opponent who had brushed past her. That's how it is, until now. Her hands were still clean, and the twin blades at her waist did not appear to have left their scabbards. No one knew how she managed to wound the bladeless swordsman, and no one saw it. If you were not a swordsman, this might have been a very difficult battle for me. Before her opponent dissolved into light and disappeared, Su Huaishang concluded, Unfortunately, because we're in the same field from the moment you stood before me, I knew I would win. Chapter 15:10. After Mountain River, Jianghu became the second professional team that was defeated by Underworld Frontline. At the same time, they were the 10th team that was defeated by Underworld Frontline. Ignoring the bye, Brother Ju's team defeated every opponent that they faced in the 11 rounds with a score of 3 o'clock. Of the remaining 14 teams, there were only 2 teams that maintained this zero-loss record. One was Underworld Frontline, and the other was Door to Heaven. What was interesting was that these 2 teams were both civilian teams without any studio background by the end of the 11th round. Even though there were still a few rounds left in the tournament for the best S3, it was already pretty obvious which teams were in the running for the championship. Regulation, Trash Alliance, Door to Heaven, and Underworld Frontline. These 4 teams, be it the upper limit of their power, the depth of their lineup, or their performance on the way to the next round, were far stronger than the other teams. If there were no accidents, the champion would be born among them. Therefore, for the players of the remaining 10 teams, the following random matchups became very important. In theory, if the 4 teams met consecutively in the next 2 rounds, there would be at least one runner-up among the remaining 10 teams. However, things did not progress in the direction that they had hoped. At midnight on the 14th of April, the matchup for the 12th round of S3 was announced. There were 14 teams participating in this round. Since it was an even number, there was no bye, and all the teams would face off against each other. The results showed that the 4 teams with the highest chance of winning did not meet each other. Even though the probability of this happening was not so low that it looked fake, there were still rumors on some social media platforms that the organizers were secretly manipulating the matchups. Of course, this kind of speculation that had no evidence and had nothing to do with it did not cause much of a stir. Compared to the problems that Thriller Paradise had caused over the past year, this was nothing. Thus, the 12th round passed in such an explosive atmosphere without any suspense. After this round, the top 7 teams of S3 were born. These 7 teams were, currently, the number 1 studio in the professional gaming circle, Order, an alliance formed by a group of non-contracted professional players and casual members of society. Trash Alliance, a veteran studio that had achieved many glorious results but was now gradually being relegated to the second tier. Sweet Potato, a strong team formed by 7 decent casual players. Black 8 Wonders, a team formed by 7 popular game streamers. We are not cheating. The biggest dark horse of this competition, Heaven's Gate, and the indescribable but seemingly unnecessary Frontline Hell. According to the rules, in the 13th round of the competition, one team would have a bye, and half of the other 6 teams would be eliminated to determine the top 4. However, on the morning of April 16th, when a list of matches was supposed to be announced, the Dream Company caused trouble again. They did not update the results of the matches on the official website on time, but released an announcement. Notice regarding the follow-up rules of the tournament for the Best S3. Just this title alone caused 95% of the players to go crazy before they even clicked on the link to the article. This was because the title exuded a thick sense of conspiracy, the kind that could not get any darker. Almost everyone came to this conclusion before reading the article. The Dream Company must be trying to send the 4-seeded teams into the top 4, but since there are only 7 teams, if the results of the 4 teams are staggered, then it will be fake. This way, the players will suspect that all the previous random results are manipulated. Therefore, the Dream Company had to add a new mechanism to achieve their goal. It had to be said that the players' eyes were sharp, and their guess was not wrong. According to the announcement, the original random matchmaking mechanism was still in place. In fact, the results of this round were already listed in the announcement. The matchups of the 13th round were Order vs Door to Heaven, Trash Alliance vs Sweet Potato, Underworld Frontline vs Black 8 Miracles, and We Didn't Cheat had a bye. However, on this basis, the Dream Company added 3 new rules. The first rule was that every team that had a bye in the previous 12 rounds would be considered 1 point behind in this round. What did this rule mean? Firstly, Sweet Potato, Black 8 Miracles, and We Didn't Cheat, these 3 teams that had never had a bye would definitely be fine. Secondly, teams like Trash Alliance that had encountered opponents forfeiting after the matchmaking results were out were not considered to have a bye, so they had escaped the disaster. However, Underworld Frontline, who had a bye in the 4th round, and Door to Heaven, who had a bye in the 10th round, under this rule, it meant that they had a 1-0 lead before the start of the competition. And they were not the worst off. Order, who had a bye in the 8th and 11th round respectively. This was why the word again was used in Chapter 1372 when it mentioned that Order had a bye in the 8th and 11th round respectively, had to enter the competition with a 2-0 lead attitude in this round. Looking at the matchmaking list, Order vs Door to Heaven would be considered to have a 1-0 lead from the start, which meant that the latter had the match point in their hands right from the start. However, both teams still had to form a complete lineup of 7 people and start the competition from the Vanguard battle. As for Underworld Frontline vs Black 8 Miracles, it was still fine. With Brother Jew and the others' abilities, it would not have much of an impact, even if they gave up one match. It was very likely that the competition would still end before the participation match. Then, looking at the second rule that was added in the next round, the 14th round, the 4 teams that had successfully entered the top 4 would each be allocated a divine artifact. The 4 divine artifacts were Crown, Holy Grail, Philosopher's Stone, and Amulet. As for the origin and explanation of these 4 Atari divine artifacts, the official website also released a video. This video was created by a well-known game review video author at the beginning of the 21st century, and it was called Sword Seeking. This video introduced the origin, value, and related rumors of the 4 divine artifacts in detail. Of course, the Dream Company would not give the players the real thing. What they gave was a data version of the 4 divine artifacts. The Dream Company claimed that these 4 divine artifacts each had a significant team buff, and between the buffs, there was a relationship that was sufficient to reverse the outcome of the competition. However, as for what the buffs were, it would only be announced after the end of the next round of matchmaking. In addition, the performance of each team in this round would also determine the order and rights of the distribution of the divine artifacts in the next round. The rules were as follows. In terms of time, the team that won in the fastest time could exchange the remaining divine artifact with the divine artifact in the hands of any team after the other three teams had obtained the divine artifacts. Of course, they could also choose not to exchange. The team that won in the second fastest time could be the first to choose the divine artifact, and they would distribute one divine artifact to the team that won in the third fastest time and the team that won in the first round. The team that won in the third fastest time could choose whether to exchange the divine artifact in their hands with the team that won in the first round. As for the team that won in the first round, unfortunately, they could only passively accept the results of the distribution. Finally, the third additional rule was set. The team that won the first round could choose to exchange positions with any team. Of course, they could also choose not to exchange positions and directly advance to the next round. Seeing this, everyone should be able to guess. That's right, the members of We're Not Cheating, the party that chose the third rule, after learning about the rules after a short discussion, they decided to switch places with Heaven's Gate. No matter how one looked at it, the exchange was beneficial to them. Simply calculating, if they did not exchange positions this round, the three opponents that they would face in the next round would be Underworld Frontline, Trash Alliance, and the winner between Regulation and Door to Heaven. They would all be seeded teams, and they would have the priority to get the divine artifact. No matter how one looked at it, it was a dead end. But what if they exchanged positions? Then the situation would be completely different. The members of We Are Not Cheating were all relatively famous game streamers. 4 of them were former professional gamers, and even though the other 3 had not joined a professional gaming club, they were all full-time gamers. In terms of gaming time, they were not something that amateurs could compare to. At least in Thriller Paradise, their skill level was no different from professional gamers. In fact, they might even be better. It was not hard to see that such a team had a high opinion of themselves and had a certain level of ambition. Even if they did not think that they would be lucky enough to win the first round, they could still fight for the second place. So, to continue to win and advance, who should they exchange positions with? Using the method of elimination, exchanging Sweet Potato meant that they would have to fight Trash Alliance. That was basically suicide. Exchanging Black 8 Miracle meant that they would have to fight Underworld Frontline with a 1 o'clock ratio. As for Trash Alliance or Underworld Frontline, it was possible because they had a 70% chance of taking down Sweet Potato or Black 8 Miracle. But winning did not mean that they would win. At this stage of the competition, the remaining teams would not be that weak. If they ended up with a 3-2 ratio, then it would be very awkward, considering the rules of the next round. If they played all 5 matches or dragged on for too long, it was very likely that they would become the 3rd fastest team to win, spending so much effort in the end only to have a little more initiative than insisting on a bye was not worth it. As for the plan of changing out order, it was naturally rejected as the first one. Not to mention, going up against Heaven's Gate with a 1 o'clock start was similar to going up against Hell's Frontline. It was a 2-8 start. Moreover, this move also saved Order, who was on the brink of death. To Order, between being countered by the aura of the artifact in the next round and going against Heaven's Gate, with a situation where they had the match point at the beginning, the former was obviously more controllable. In summary, exchanging Heaven's Gate was the only and best choice for the streamers. With this change of position, We Are Not Cheating would have a 2 o'clock lead at the beginning. As long as they won 1 point, they would advance. Moreover, they would advance by eliminating Order. Regardless of the details of the process, if this became a reality, they could brag about it for the rest of their lives. More importantly, with a 2 o'clock lead at the beginning, it was equivalent to saving 2 rounds of time. If things went well, not only would they be able to eliminate the insufferably arrogant Order, they would also be able to steadily obtain the right to choose the artifact in the next round. That was to say, they would have a 100% advantage of being countered by the artifact. Therefore, compared to insisting on a free pass, exchanging Heaven's Gate was undoubtedly the best choice. With this change, there was a high probability that they would be able to get a runner-up. To make a long story short, after a day of torment, everything was settled in the early morning of the 17th. Trash Alliance, Underworld Frontline, as well as the lucky Heaven's Gate that was switched to the free pass, had all advanced as expected. In the previous 24 hours, Order, who had been actively preparing for battle while protesting against the rules, finally turned the tables with a 3-2 score and defeated We Are Not Cheating. This was a very ugly match, at least in the eyes of the audience. Order, who had always presented themselves as a king, had sent out all of their drunken dreams in the first 3 rounds. They had also let these 4 come up with a set of Mark Selby-style grinding tactics, turning the 3 matches into a very dull and drawn-out battle. Order had done this for 3 reasons. First, it was naturally to seek stability. In this kind of match where the opponent had 3 match points at the beginning of the match, no matter how stable they were, it wouldn't be too much. After all, they still had an absolute advantage in terms of raw strength. As long as they completely gave up on the ornamental aspect and took the matter of stability to the extreme, they would be able to maximize their chances of winning. Second, stalling for time was also a part of psychological warfare. The team behind Order had already calculated clearly what the members of We Are Not Cheating were planning before the match. They had grasped the opponent's mentality of wanting to take down the match point in one go and implemented the 3 words stalling, grinding, and exhausting to the end. The longer the match dragged on, the more impatient the opponent would be, and then they would be full of flaws. Third, contributing such a match was also a silent protest from Order to the Dream Company. What they wanted to express was, since you guys used the rules to launch a surprise attack on us, then we'll counterattack with the ratings and reputation of this match. Unfortunately, at this stage, no one in the Dream Company cared about these things. In the final stage of this gamble, those employees who had been under the cognitive interference for a long time would be more affected and shackled in their thinking. Naturally, they wouldn't think about things that the higher-ups didn't want to care about. They wouldn't even form the relevant concept in their minds. Chapter 15:11. On the 18th of April, the matchups for the S3 tournament for the best were announced. The matchups were as follows: Trash Alliance vs. Heaven's Door, Frontline Hell vs. Order. As these 4 teams were all favorites to win the championship, there were not many complaints about the matchups. Anyway, no matter how they were matched, it would be a battle between the strong, so the audience had no reason to say that it was shady. However, the introduction of the divine artifacts did make the situation more interesting. The effects of these 4 divine artifacts were as follows: Frowny Face Crown. Apply the special effect of King's Deterrence to all enemy units that enter the battlefield. The affected targets will have their life points reduced by a percentage until they die. Note: the damage of King's Deterrence cannot be blocked by effects other than the effects of the divine artifacts, including the battlefield barrier. Holy Grail. All members of our team will receive the special effect of Divine Blood after entering the battlefield. If the affected targets do not receive any damage for 10 consecutive seconds, a Divine Blood energy shield will automatically form around them. This shield can block and eliminate any special effect, including the effects of the divine artifacts, that the opponent applies to the party. Philosopher's Stone. Periodically release the special effect of Turn Stone into Gold to all enemy units that enter the battlefield. Once every 30 seconds, the affected target's equipment, skills, and items will have a layer of value increase buff. This buff will increase the quality and equipment requirement of the item skill, but the special effect will not change. This effect can only be eliminated by the effects of the divine artifacts. When the equipment requirement of the item's skill exceeds the wielder's ability, it will be ineffective or unable to be activated. Protection Talisman. All members of our team will receive the special effect of Divine Protection after entering the battlefield. When our team members are affected by the opponent's continuous ability, including the effects of the divine artifacts, the debuff and damage will be reflected, and the buff will be retained and strengthened. From information given by the officials, the effect of the divine artifacts was quite obvious. Crown definitely countered. Holy Grail. because King's deterrence could start to reduce the opponent's HP through the barrier from the very first second the enemy entered the battlefield. This kind of continuous damage that could not be blocked by the player's own means was equivalent to nullifying Divine Blood Gift. The Holy Grail countered the Philosopher's Stone because the Divine Blood Energy Shield could eliminate the Philosopher's Stone's value increase, and the Holy Grail, Divine Blood Energy Shield, could eliminate the value increase, Next, Philosopher's Stone countered Amulet because Divine Right Protection not only couldn't negate the pseudo-buff effect of value increase, but it would also make it stronger. However, because the Divine Right Protection could reflect debuffs and damage, Amulet was able to suppress Crown when it encountered Crown. Lastly, looking at the cross-comparison, Crown and Philosopher's Stone, Holy Grail, and Talisman, there wasn't any obvious restraining relationship between them. It was a situation where they could work together. That was the information regarding the Divine Weapon. Although it was not certain that the one who could counter the Divine Weapon would win, the advantage would be huge. At least, it would make up for the difference in strength to a great extent. Therefore, in this round of battle between the strong, the choice of Divine Artifact had become the key to determining the outcome of the battle. According to the rules, Gate of Heaven, which had been switched to the empty slot in the previous round, had no right to participate in the distribution of the Divine Artifacts in this round. Let's talk about the other three teams. First of all, Trash Alliance had obtained the right to be the first to distribute the Divine Weapon in the semifinals because they had finished the second fastest in the previous round. This kind of brainstorming work was naturally left to Hong Hu to do. After he thought carefully, he finally chose Philosopher's Stone for his team, Talisman for Gate of Heaven, and Holy Grail for Order. Hong Hu's thinking was very clear. He would do his best to reduce the possibility of his team being countered. No matter what, it was impossible to completely eliminate it theoretically. Therefore, he could only reduce it. How could he reduce it? The allocation that he made was the best answer. Hong Hu not only calculated the account of his team, he also calculated the account of Order. After Trash Alliance had made their selection, the initiative would fall into the hands of Order. Although Order could choose whether to change the Divine Weapon Gate of Heaven, this exchange would not change their fate of being countered. This was because Frontline Hell, who had finished the previous round first, would, according to logic, obtain a Divine Weapon that countered Order in the end. Therefore, Order's choice this time was actually to decide whether they would be countered with Holy Grail or Talisman. If they kept Holy Grail, the whole field would be affected by the continuous HP loss. If they changed to Talisman in the battle as time passed, all the items and special effects would gradually become useless. Moreover, due to the effects of the Divine Weapon itself, the process of being useless would be accelerated. Comparing the two, in this kind of evenly matched battle, it was obviously better to keep Holy Grail. With this calculation, Order naturally chose not to change it. Of course, Order could also forcefully choose to change it. After the exchange, they would obtain Talisman, and Gate of Heaven would obtain Holy Grail. In order to counter Order, Frontline Hell would definitely use Crown to exchange Sage Stone from Trash Alliance. In this way, the final situation would still become Trash Alliance would use Crown to counter Gate of Heaven's Holy Grail, and Frontline Hell would use Sage Stone to counter Order as Talisman. In other words, no matter how they changed, Trash Alliance and Frontline Hell would be countered, and the other two teams would be countered. If they wanted Trash Alliance to be countered, there was only one possibility, and that was regardless of whether Order changed it or not, Frontline Hell would force themselves to be countered and drag Trash Alliance down with them. No matter how crazy Feng Bujue was, there was no reason for him to do such a thing. It was one thing to use madness to cover up reasonable wisdom or some kind of belief or intention, but it was another thing to do something illogical or even stupid in order to appear crazy. Therefore, the final situation was the same as Hong Hu's arrangement. The top four battle would begin with Trash Alliance, Sage Stone, Gate of Heaven, Talisman, Frontline Hell, Crown, Order, Holy Grail, Frontline Hell, Crown. Chapter 1512, April 19th, 12:00 a.m. The tournament for the Best S3 semifinals began on time. Since it was already the semifinals, out of consideration for the ratings and respect for the advertisers, the two matches were staggered. Underworld Frontline and Order could rest for one more day in this round and fight again on the morning of the 20th. Tonight's battle was between the Trash Alliance and Door to Heaven. Loading complete. Tournament for the Best S3 semifinals. Venue: Gray Cloud Mountain. When the members of the two teams entered the spectator space, the system voice rang in their ears. Then, it was followed by the announcement. The match will begin in 30 seconds. In the Vanguard battle, the two people who were sent to the battlefield were Flying Pegasus and Charlie. Everyone was very familiar with Brony. As for Surreal, judging from his appearance, he looked just like most casual players. He had the face of an ordinary person that had been modified to look slightly more handsome. He wore a set of black and white clothes, and he did not have any weapons or equipment on him. It was hard to tell what kind of player he was, since this match was carried out under the effect of the divine weapon. From the moment they entered the arena, the special effect of the Philosopher's Stone on the side of Trash Alliance, turned stone into gold, had already begun its countdown. The moment the barrier disappeared, it was exactly 30 seconds. In other words, the moment the battle officially began, all of Surreal's equipment and skills would have an increase in value. Moreover, with the amulet of Door to Heaven's Door to Heaven, the increase would be even stronger. It was very likely that more than half of Surreal's equipment and skills would lose their effects immediately. Of course, based on ambitious analysis, there was a countermeasure to deal with this sort of counter. The other party only needed to adjust their items and skills before the match, and bring some items with very low learning requirements to fight. Even though doing so would reduce their combat power by a lot, it was still better than bringing a whole set of useless items. 2, 1, fight! The countdown ended quickly, and the barrier disappeared. In this kind of one-on-one battle, Flying Pegasus usually did not retreat during the preparation stage. Surreal did not retreat at all. Once the battle began, the two of them engaged in close combat. The audience thought that what followed next would be an earth-shattering and hearty battle. However, the reality was, hum. Following the strange hum of energy, Surreal's eyes shone with a strange light. Flying Pegasus, who was being stared at by him, was like a still frame in a movie. He maintained a charging motion and stopped moving. At that moment, Phantom Dawn, who was watching the match in the conference room, said with a serious expression, as expected, "This development again." Dawn. Based on his tone, he was not surprised. "You still can't see anything?" Sashimi asked. It was obvious that this was not the first time they had discussed the topic of Heaven's Gate. Phantom Dawn nodded. "I can't observe them at all. I can only guess their power from the third party's performance." He paused and raised his eyes to look at Flying Pegasus on the screen. For example, now, from Pegasus data, his physical movement has been suppressed by some kind of power. Even his energy movement has been restricted, and Surreal, who has activated this power, appears to only have to pay the price of keeping an eye on his opponent. Sashimi sighed. From the match record so far, all 7 members of their team have demonstrated this kind of unreasonable power. Without a doubt, their powers are permanent skills that can be used repeatedly. The main point is not how powerful their power is. Meng Jingchan cut in. The main point is, where did these people come from? He paused for a few seconds and took a puff of his cigarette before continuing. Regarding the blocking of Phantom Dawn's data view, it is understandable. After all, Thriller Paradise has a large player base. Even people like Feng Bujue who can replicate other people's skills exist, so it is normal for there to be a few players who can reverse data view. But in a team, 7 players with related IDs all have this power, and they're all super powerful, so the chance of this happening is scarily low. The weirdest thing is, these 7 experts are like bosses that appeared out of nowhere. Even with the connections that we at Regulation have, we cannot find any players who have interacted with them in the scenario. There is also no record of any posts or replies from their IDs on the gaming forum. This is something that should be impossible among non-professional players. Then you mean, Yiji heard the hidden meaning in his words, so she asked for clarification. Meng Jingchan blew out a puff of smoke. This team is probably related to the Dream Company in some way. You mean they have colluded with the people inside the Dream Company? Yiji asked. Did they use some kind of hack that the company came up with? Or did they directly change the data? No, that's not what I mean, Zen corrected her. Over the past year, the Dream Company's work and execution is clear for all to see. If it was one of their employees who colluded with outsiders to cheat, this team would have been found out a long time ago, and they would have been disqualified. None of the employees who colluded with them would have been able to escape. Now, since this team has made it to the semifinals without being found out, it means that the Dream Company does not think that there is anything wrong with them. In fact, there is a possibility that this team is actually supported by the company behind the scenes. Upon hearing this, Understanding Death turned around and asked, Your explanation makes sense based on the current results, but what is the motive behind this? Why would the Dream Company plan a team like this in the competition? How is that beneficial to them? That's what I don't understand, Zen replied. You can say that they are creating stars. The 7 members of the Heavenly Court team are as low-key as fugitives. No matter how you look at it, they don't look like they want to be famous. You can say that they were paid to sell the championship. How much money would the Dream Company have to pay to do something like this? To be honest, I personally feel that the Dream Company is not a company that treats the players like their sons. They are a company that treats the players like their grandsons and treats their investors like their grandsons. He shrugged and continued. The only hypothesis that I can think of is the Dream Company planted such a powerful team in the competition to use them to eliminate certain teams or players. While they were talking on the battlefield, the Vanguard battle had ended. Even though Flying Pegasus had been trying to break free from the shackles since the first second, he still failed. A moment later, Charlie, who felt that he had observed enough, could only sigh softly and say, You do have some unique charisma, and you have a certain level of potential and talent in certain aspects. However, in this final selection, just that alone isn't enough for you to pass. Being unable to leave the confinement of the evil means that you haven't found a way to escape the level of a creature in the 2 paths of strength and spiritual sense. Therefore, the result is obvious. As he spoke, he slowly raised his head and looked at the sky. No one knew who he was talking to, but he said, I'm sorry, you're not qualified. Then, the strange light appeared in his eyes again. Just by looking at Flying Pegasus, he turned him into a white light. The outcome of the battle ended in this standoff and inexplicable lines. The audience, commentators, and even the contestants who had been eliminated in the previous 10 or so rounds were all dumbfounded. Only a handful of people, as well as some inhuman existences with higher statuses, understood what Charlie had said. No matter what, the score became 1-0. Next, it was the Battle of the Pillars. After a short break, Raphael and Gabriel from Heaven's Gate, Swan and 7 kills from Trash Alliance appeared on the field. If Flying Pegasus's elimination was a little inexplicable and aggrieved, then these 2 could be considered to be lying down more obediently. Under the premise of being restrained by the artifact, Raphael and Gabriel stood there under the attacks of the 2 opponents for a whole minute. During this time, Honghu and 7 kills had used their ultimate moves and Soul's Eye, but they still couldn't kill a single person. This made Honghu have a feeling of, did I choose a fake artifact? Did I put on a fake set of equipment? Did I use a bunch of fake skills? Of course, it wasn't just him. 7 kills, and the audience thought so too. 1 minute later, the 2 received the evaluation of that's all they got, and that's all they got. Then, they were killed in 1 hit by the 2 from Heaven's Door. At least the audience had confirmed one thing. The members from Heaven's Door were probably all monsters at Phantom Dawn's level. Looking at all the matches from S3 so far, only the match between Phantom Dawn and Shiva had allowed a top player to attack for a whole minute and then easily counterattack. Previously, because most of the opponents that Heaven's Gate faced were second-rate combat power, and the most powerful one was Red Cherry, who did not have Su Huaishang support. Therefore, the players had a vague sense of the upper limit of their strength. But now, when they met Trash Alliance, they still showed that suffocating calmness and power that made others despair. This was not something that could be described with a normal strong. If not for the Dream Company's stubbornness and the team's low-profile attitude, 90% of the players would have believed them if they said they were cheaters without any evidence. Chapter 15-13. To make a long story short, after the Battle of the Pillars, the score had become 2-0. The next Battle of the Generals would be between Michael and Weary Dream. At this stage, everyone, including Weary Dream himself, felt that the Trash Alliance's momentum had already been lost. From an outsider's point of view, it was very likely that they would be swept aside, and they might not even have a chance to fight the Deputy Generals. From the members' point of view, even if they could turn the score back to 2-2 in the final Battle of the Generals, it would be impossible for Teacher Chi to win the match point. However, this general trend did not affect Weary Dream's mentality and performance. He, who had been transported to the battlefield, did not shrink back, nor did he feel lost. He only held Chong Lu in his hand and stood proudly. His mind was free of distractions, and he only wanted to fight. 2, 1, fight! The moment the countdown ended, Weary Dream broke through the barrier with a body full of abundant fighting energy. Like a tsunami, he swallowed the enemy whole. However, Michael stood in the midst of that violent flow of energy, not retreating even half a step. He was completely unmoved. Chi! The tip of the halberd rose, and a gust of wind blew. Weary Dream was not afraid of a strong enemy, and he charged forward with his halberd. Michael turned his body and caught the halberd with his bare hands. He actually grabbed the body of the halberd that was sweeping toward him and forcefully stopped his opponent's attack. The prodigal son has turned over a new leaf. Your tolerance is indeed extraordinary. At this moment, Michael, who had clamped down on his opponent's weapon, was actually able to speak in a rather calm tone. But it seems it's still beyond my power. Hey, Weary Dream heard this and did not show too much surprise. He only smiled and said, "What's up with this tone of yours? As if you know me very well?" As he spoke, he had already increased the force on his wrist, and his godly power surged again. In that second, not only did Michael's expression change slightly, but his feet were also forced to take a step back. Speaking of which, this is the first time we've met, right? Brother, who exactly are you? Also, your team is so strong. Where did you come from? Weary Dream was still pressuring him, and he also casually raised a few questions. He was not the only one who had questions. The audience and the other contestants were also very interested in these questions. In the next second, Michael actually laughed as well, but he didn't answer Sleepy Dream's question. Instead, he continued, "Not bad." He paused for half a second, and then said seriously, "Come, put in more effort. Let me see how much of this strength of yours is worth." All right. Tired Dream thought that the other party didn't want him to fish for information, so he provoked him. Since that was the case, then let's fight. As a result, he raised his fighting prowess again and urged his divine power again. He raised his halberd and continued to move, advancing his killing move again. Michael, on the other hand, already knew that Weary Dream intended to fight this battle by continuously raising his upper limit. Out of his duty, Michael decided to use a slightly higher combat power to test and observe his opponent. Therefore, he immediately made a move to meet his opponent. For a moment, divine power, holy power, the two extremes intersected, surging and surging, spreading across the cliff and shaking the surroundings. Although the two parties still seemed to be at ease, the battlefield could no longer withstand such power. In the blink of an eye, the place had been moved, rocks cracked, and rocks flew. Under this change, the two who were fighting had to both leap into the air and fight in the air. For Michael, who was born with wings, this was no doubt a good thing. He thought that in a place where there was no leverage, his opponent wouldn't be able to urge his divine power again. But he was wrong. Even in the air, Weary Dream's soul could still generate an endless amount of power out of thin air, and it kept breaking through the upper limit. At that moment, Weary Dream even spread his arms and raised his halberd. Borrowing the momentum of his swing and the might of his divine power, he used a short moment of high ground to perform the skill, billowing clouds and waves. This was the first S-grade skill that the players in Thriller Paradise learned on their own. It was also the supreme tier skill that Weary Dream used to break through the shackles in his heart. Now that Weary Dream used it again, it was another level higher. Boom! The halberd was raised, the divine power urged, and the fighting aura poured down like a raging torrent. Seeing this, Michael hurriedly channeled his holy power and crossed his arms to block, but he was still pushed to the ground by the power of that skill. A sudden blow, the clouds, and the sea. Green Cloud Mountain had just been shaken open, and now it was hit by this heavy blow from the sky. It couldn't help but fall apart, causing the ground to collapse and valleys to appear. Rocks fell from the sky into the valleys. It's not over yet. Weary Dream's attack didn't stop. With his current ability, it was enough to see that Michael was far from being forced into a desperate situation after receiving the attack. So, he immediately stepped on the falling rocks and rushed back and forth, chasing after the falling enemy. While Michael's body was still unsettled, Weary Dream followed up with another skill, 7 Splendors of the Long Moon. The halberd flashed continuously, cold and murderous. The killing move that followed like a shadow was exquisite, fast, dangerous, and extraordinary. But before the holy power, it was still ineffective. Not only was it ineffective, but Weary Dream's breathing was also messed up as he continued to attack, while Michael still looked very calm. The battle in the air didn't last too long. When both of them landed on the ground and stopped attacking and defending, Michael spoke again. "I have a question I want to ask you now." "Huh?" Weary Dream was stunned for a moment, then laughed and said, "Huh. Sure, ask away. I'll take the chance to catch my breath." He was a proud person in his bones, after all. Even if the opponent didn't consciously give him time to catch his breath, he didn't want to take advantage of this silently. "Why do you want to team up with that non-candidate?" Michael blurted out half a sentence, but quickly realized that he shouldn't have said some words, so he corrected himself. "Why do you want to team up with Teacher? You all should know. His existence will affect you all." His words, to an outsider, might be interpreted as another meaning, but Weary Dream still understood the other party's original meaning. "Oh, you even know about that matter? Huh. Looks like you're really strong to the level of data observation." He paused. "However, I don't expect you to understand us. I can only answer you. To us, the Trash Alliance, victory isn't the most important thing." Weary Dream's reply was indeed the intention of their entire team. After all, the Trash Alliance wasn't a team that was obsessed with victory. If they were, they wouldn't have let Teacher E join the team at all. With Hong Hu's connections, would it be difficult to find a first-class expert to make up the numbers? Taking a step back, with the strength of their current members, so what if they openly recruited a team member? Wouldn't the strong people who wanted to join the team fight to the death? In this S3, there was one thing that most people didn't realize. Essentially, the Trash Alliance was a casual team that didn't have any desire for results. Their situation was roughly, a few friends who played the same online game saw that there was going to be a competition, so they agreed to form a team to participate in it. This kind of thing was extremely common and normal among casual players. The difference between the Trash Alliance and them was that the strength of the members was very strong. That was all. After understanding this point, looking at the matter with Teacher E, it was easy to understand, as casual players, our original motive for playing games was often just to have fun with friends. However, many times, our goals would unknowingly change the game character's level, rank, equipment, ranking, weekly activity attendance, DKP, and so on. When we become obsessed with and lose ourselves in the wealth, status, and sense of superiority that we obtain in the virtual world, the happiness that the game brings is no longer the original taste. Many years later, looking back, the game that was so popular back then had already become the tears of time. The account that we poured so much effort into was just a speck of dust in a dusty database. Even the friends that we fought together in the virtual world had long since lost contact with us. In the end, only the memories of fighting together remained, and it added a bit of sadness. The members of the Trash Alliance were a group of people who still retained the original motive of playing games. A group of men who placed the process of fighting together above the results. A group of Uncle Trash. Although their personalities were different, they could understand each other and get along well. They were the purest players. They fought with all their might, and they enjoyed the joys and sorrows of playing games together. They didn't act out of greed, and they definitely wouldn't blame each other for things that happened in the game. Unfortunately, from the perspective of a candidate, there was no doubt that they were all unqualified. Being able to adapt to circumstances, being hot-blooded and pure, redeeming themselves, and being independent. It wasn't that a candidate couldn't have these qualities, but they couldn't be just like that. All right. After hearing Sleepy Dream's answer, Michael looked into the latter's eyes for a few seconds and said, "It seems like you're telling the truth." As he spoke, he raised his head and looked at Tianyan. There's no need to observe the remaining two anymore. Sleepy Dream didn't know what he was talking about, and neither did the audience. After he finished speaking, he stood there and waited silently for a moment. Then, as if he had received some kind of feedback, he nodded slightly and looked at Sleepy Dream again. Phew! At that moment, Michael let out a long sigh and said, "In that case, our mission will end here." He paused for half a second and looked at his opponent with a kind of benevolent gaze that didn't match his age at all. He continued, "One last aggression. Perhaps you don't quite understand what I'm talking about, but I still want to tell you that I've never regretted betting on you. Your growth over the past year has also proven that I didn't misjudge you. Of course, business is business. At this moment, my judgment is still that you're unqualified." Sleepy Dream really didn't understand Michael's words, but it didn't matter, because when Michael finished speaking, he had already activated a surge of holy power that was far beyond Sleepy Dream's current level. He activated the light of Permatha and directly illuminated Sleepy Dream until there was nothing left of him. At this point, the journey of the Trash Alliance in S3 had come to an end. Although they were swept out of the competition, looking at the process, it wasn't an unjust loss. After all, their opponents were so strong that people wanted to report them. In fact, many people's first thought after watching this competition was to report them. There were even some media outlets that had started to draft provocative articles about the possibility of Heaven's Door being a cheating team before Sleepy Dream's match had even ended. Although these people didn't have any evidence, they generally believed that based on the content recorded in the video of the competition, there was no need to explain anything further. However, an inconceivable thing happened before these people stuck their faces out for others to slap. In the early morning of the 19th day, before the video of the semifinals had been generated, the captain of Heaven's Door, Michael, and his 6 teammates actually appeared in the live broadcast channel of the competition that had yet to be closed. For the majority of the audience, this was definitely a moment that refreshed their worldview. This group of mysterious players who had always been extremely low-key and didn't even communicate with the outside world had not only made an appearance outside of the competition for the first time, but also in such a highly anticipated live broadcast. From the live broadcast, the place where the 7 of them were in was a primitive conference room that hadn't been renovated at all. Although the 7 of them were in the camera, only Michael was the only one who spoke as a representative. His speech was very brief. First, he thanked the Dream Company for urgently approving their request to make a decision through this official platform. Then he said a piece of news that made all the players feel that they must have heard wrongly. Heaven's Door forfeited. Chapter 1514. April 19th. Evening, Feng Bujue's home. At that moment, Brother Ju, who had just finished washing the dishes, was sitting before the computer and browsing the web. Needless to say, for the whole day, various forums related to Thriller Paradise had been discussing Door to Heaven's withdrawal, and the media had spared no effort to create a large number of articles with misleading titles but no actual content. Naturally, Feng Bujue would not pay much attention to this kind of useless information. At most, he would glance through it. The valuable information that he really wanted to read was the official announcement from the Dream Company. However, the Dream Company did not provide any explanation for this. They only released a new announcement. Due to Door to Heaven's withdrawal, the semifinals between Underworld Frontline and Regulation have been upgraded to the finals of S3. The finals will be held at midnight on April 20th, and the rules of the Divine Gear will remain the same. Even though many players thought that this announcement did not say anything, there was nothing wrong with how the Dream Company handled it. The decision to forfeit was made by the members of Heaven's Gate. Because this matter was too unbelievable, it was easy to think that the organizers were playing dirty tricks. Therefore, the members of Heaven's Gate made a special announcement through the live broadcast. With regards to the reason for their withdrawal, that was their own business. It was their right to withdraw, but it was not their duty to explain the reason to the public. Since they did not want to explain, what could the Dream Company say? In any case, the Dream Company continued the competition based on the rules. Now that there were only 2 teams that had not been eliminated, the battle between these 2 teams would naturally be the finals. Just as Feng Bujue was looking at the announcement, suddenly a voice chat request popped up on the chatting software at the corner of the desktop. The window showed that an unfamiliar user with the ID Michael had invited Brother Ju to chat online, and the other party source was unknown. This was a source that did not exist in the chatting software. Feng Bujue thought about it for 2 seconds before he picked up the earpiece on the computer table and put it on. Then he clicked accept. The next second, the voice chat was established, and a man's voice came through the earpiece. "I believe you should know who I am." Feng Bujue answered. "Of course I do. People like you who use your real name as your online username are basically salespeople. Your sense of humor is as impressive as the rumors say, but I don't think these unimportant words will help our communication," Michael said. "You have a point," Feng Bujue said. "Then, let's cut to the chase. What do you want from me?" "First, I would like to apologize on behalf of my men for the unpleasant things that happened to you in the past," Michael said. "I also want to inform you that Uriel has received his due punishment." "Punishment?" Feng Bujue asked. "What punishment? Aruba was finished in a few moves? Didn't he participate in the competition with you? I don't see anything wrong with him. He's allowed to participate with me because he's already paid the price for his actions," Michael replied. "Threatening several candidates, including you and Shilong, interfering with gambling, and speaking rudely in front of the Senate are all serious crimes. For this, not only was Uriel punished by the judges, he was also punished by the Senate with a broken feather punishment. After the incident, Uriel himself expressed deep remorse. At least from my point of view, that's more than enough." "Oh, is that so?" He smiled. "Huh. But from how I see it, he has to personally come and apologize to all of us involved in this matter. Only then will that be enough. Unfortunately, for the next 1,000 years, he is not allowed to communicate with humans in the real world, including voice calls like this," Michael said. "So, as a superior and elder brother, I have to apologize on his behalf." "So that's how it is," Feng Bujue said. "You appear to be quite a reasonable person, different from your brothers." "I am not a human, but I accept the praise in your words," Michael said. "I have to admit that many of my brothers and sisters have different degrees of disgust for human beings. Part of the disgust comes from the objective differences on the biological level, and part of the disgust comes from the depravity of the human race and your contempt for us after you lost your faith. In this post-apocalyptic era, the masters on earth have forgotten the majesty of us, the followers in heaven, but we cannot let go of our glory and pride because of that. That is where the contradiction lies. What about you? How can you communicate with me as an equal? Feng Buju asked. I never said that I am an equal to you. Apologizing to you does not mean that I am groveling, Michael said. You can think of it as, in fact, I am more arrogant than them, so my attitude toward you is gentler. To put it simply, the degree of deification is stronger than theirs, Feng Buju said. Just say it directly. I can understand it. Oh, Michael's tone changed slightly. It seems that Woody has told you a lot of things since you mentioned, let me ask you something. How is he recently? I have not contacted him for a long time, Feng Buju replied. Didn't you hear what I said just now? Michael said, interfering with gambling, speaking rudely in the parliament, and so on are all felonies. Feng Buju pondered. I understand. Although I did not know to what extent Woody has done, based on my experience with him and Uriel, his crime is probably 10 times more serious than Uriel's, right? With regards to his punishment, I have no comment, Michael said. What I can tell you is your action of helping him retrieve the crown has greatly reduced his punishment. In fact, it might have saved his life. Crown? Feng Buju thought about it for a second and said, the Atari crown that I got from Snow. Yes, Michael said. That is an important item in the candidate game. Even though it has slowly become a symbol over the years, according to tradition, it still has to be used. Therefore, the Parliament decided to use the actual item as the basis to create the 4 artifacts that you used in Thriller Paradise. This should have been quite troublesome to do, because the 4 items have too many karma related to them, and it would have been difficult to retrieve them. But who would have thought Woody would be able to complete the retrieval work so quickly without using any resources? This contribution has become his life-saving straw. So, it is something that important? Feng Buju mumbled. TSK. It feels like I have lost out again. I will have to scam him again the next time we meet. I seriously doubt that you will be able to meet him again, Michael said coldly. Of course, that is none of my business, fine. Brother Buju pouted and said, back to the topic. You shouldn't have contacted me just to apologize on behalf of your brother, right? Is there anything else? I am here to inform you and to congratulate you on winning the candidate game, Michael replied. This time, Feng Buju was confused. However, as a cunning person, he reacted 2 seconds later. Wait a minute. You're not trying to trick me, to make me lower my guard or give up in the finals, are you? It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. I am just here to inform you of the result, Michael replied. Of all the candidates, you are undoubtedly one of the most outstanding ones. If we were to make a horizontal comparison with your ability, since the beginning of the game, you've relied on your wisdom and strength to defeat every candidate of the same level who has a competitive relationship with you in different forms and at different points in time. And from the perspective of personal charm and social skills, from the perspective of a politician, your popularity in the main universe of Thriller Paradise and the inner world is unrivaled. It is far beyond any other player and even the virtual creatures. You're the most popular person in the game. As for those ambiguous and debatable candidates, my brothers and I have personally selected them one by one during this S3 competition to ensure that we didn't miss anyone with potential who might have a chance to compete with you. In conclusion, the candidate game has ended. Even though Woody is still receiving his punishment, he has indeed won. He has successfully proven the validity of his concept to the council. From now on, at least until the next era arrives, the candidate game will be disguised as the most popular interactive entertainment product in human society at the same time period. Humanity will no longer need to shed blood for this. The era of using blood and life to exchange for glory has ended, and whether it will return or not, that is not something you need to consider. After hearing his story, Feng Buju basically believed him because he could not find any reason for the man to lie. Therefore, Brother Ju's instinctive malice started to rise. Fine, you could do that. After that, he continued in a mocking tone. Then, here comes the question, as the winner, I should get some benefits, right? Like a mountain of gold, a pool of wine, and 70 virgins? At that moment, Michael was suppressed by Brother Ju. You live with your girlfriend, right? How can you say something like that so loudly? Stop wasting time. She went to the supermarket to buy something. Feng Bujue did not wait for the man to finish. He raised his voice again and interrupted him. Hurry up and tell me. Where are the benefits? Michael groaned. There are no benefits. Bullsh asterisk T. Is your cloaca deformed into a mouth or something? In the real world, Brother Jew could use all kinds of profanities freely, and that raised his ability to express himself by more than one level. A game that has such a long cycle and is related to the fate of humanity, and you're telling me that there is no reward for winning? Tell me, did you take all the benefits that old madam gave me as a rebate? When Michael heard this, he was silent for a long time, but he still could not understand how dirty Brother Jew's words were. So, he gave up and explained, according to tradition, the chosen winner will be blessed by the Parliament and become the only one in the world who will not cause any karma for any action. He will also be given a special constitution that allows him to control the two opposite forces, holy power and magic power. He paused for a moment. But you are not a creature of this universe. You come from another universe. In other words, you're not affected by the karma of this universe. This is one of the reasons why Woody asked you to help him retrieve the crown. Similarly, since you are not one of us, the blessing of two powers cannot be used. He paused for another 2 seconds. You should understand what I'm saying, right? Understood. Feng Bujue suddenly used an extremely calm tone to reply this one word. Then, Michael was a little afraid to continue. About this, do you have anything else to say? Brother Jew's answer was short and firm. Michael muttered again. If there is nothing else, just as he was about to hang up, Feng Bujue asked, Oh yeah, if I win the final, can I make an additional request? Michael would not lie. He said whatever he wanted to say. No, the remaining game is just a normal game between humans that has nothing to do with the candidate game. We can't. Beep beep. Before he could finish, Brother Jew had taken the initiative to cut off the voice call. Feng Bujue was using his actions to express. If that is the case, then we humans have nothing to say to you. Chapter 15:15. April 19th, 11:30 p.m. Even though there was still some time before the start of the competition, the number of online players in Thriller Paradise had already reached 8 digits. If the users on the live stream were included, then the number of viewers waiting to watch the S3 finals had definitely reached more than 100 million. It was at this point in time that another shocking thing happened. Similar to when Heaven's Door announced their forfeit, this time, Underworld Frontline also contacted Dream Company and obtained permission to announce the news through the official platform. Just like that, Feng Bujue appeared on the screens of all the major livestream platforms. This scene was like an emergency news report. It interrupted the advertisements and promo of all the channels, and it shocked the viewers who were waiting before their screens. Their first reaction was, is Underworld Frontline going forfeit as well? Don't worry, we will not forfeit. As if reading everyone's thoughts, Feng Bujue opened his mouth to say that. When he said that, there was a mocking smile on his face. I just have a few words that I wish to convey to everyone at Regulation. Brother Bujue said, even though I can tell you this privately, in that situation, my words might be seen as fraud by you, and it might not achieve the desired effect. Therefore, I am using this method to publicly announce my intentions. He paused and used a very serious tone to continue. Since the Dream Company did not give me much time, I will not waste it here. I will get to the point. Everyone at Regulation, we know very well what kind of competition the viewers want to see the most. This is already the finals, so there is no reason for something like rules to become an obstacle for the competition. Therefore, I will say this now. Phantom Dawn, I, Feng Bujue, will be waiting for you at the Battle of the Vanguard. Today, at the finals of the tournament for the best, I will fight you one-on-one. After saying that, he turned off the video call, leaving behind those words that echoed in everyone's hearts. Although he had left a message, the people who heard it were in an uproar. Let's not talk about the others, just look at order. From the boss of the company to the frontline members, what kind of feeling did they have? Trust Feng Bujue? Change the original formation and have Phantom Dawn lead the charge? What if the other side sent out Snow in the first round? With Feng Bujue's moral integrity, it was entirely possible. Even if he was scolded for being despicable and shameless, it would not affect his character setting. What if he didn't believe Feng Bujue and ignored him? If he really placed himself as the vanguard, wouldn't Order be judged as a coward? Besides, even though Feng Bujue's behavior seemed extremely arrogant at first glance, his words were very honest. What did the audience want to see the most? It had to be a one-on-one battle between Phantom Dawn and Feng Bujue, but with the current rules, it was indeed hard to guarantee that the two would meet in the competition. Now, Feng Bujue was the first to speak. He wanted to challenge Phantom Dawn in the vanguard battle. If he placed himself in the vanguard position half an hour later and Order did not accept the challenge, then the latter would not only be seen as a coward, they would also seriously offend the audience. For casual players, offending the audience was not a big deal, but for a gaming studio, the risk was huge. If they did not accept the challenge and did not win the competition in the end, they would be scolded by the audience for a whole week, the limit of the netizens' memory, and this incident would be used as an example or a joke in the future. However, if they accepted the challenge and lost the competition because they were tricked, Feng Bujue's side would only be scolded for their shamelessness. Perhaps people would think that was normal and say that Order, who had fallen for it, was too naive and dumb. Taking one step back, even if Order won the competition in the end, if they did not accept the challenge and cause Phantom Dawn and Brother Ju to not meet, then they would still offend the audience, and people might even say that they had an unfair advantage. After all, the audience was the audience. Not everyone could understand the professionalism of esports and the importance of victory. There was a large portion of the audience who wanted to watch the competition more than anything else. In the field of soccer, some teams could win the championship with a big team, and some teams could play beautifully but never win the championship. Both types of teams had their own audiences, and one could not say who was right and who was wrong because of their different tastes. In conclusion, Feng Bujue's move could be said to be the perfect example of an overt scheme. He only used a few simple sentences to throw Order into chaos before the competition. But what was the basis of his plan? It was none other than his own immeasurable shamelessness and the burden of being a famous studio that the man was carrying. 20th April, midnight. The finals of tournament for the best S3, Underworld Frontline vs. Order, officially began. Venue, Grand Line, Bonero Island. After the voice notification, the match will begin in 30 seconds. The vanguards of the two teams both entered the battlefield. On this wasteland that had been baptized by darkness and fire, Feng Bujue and Phantom Dawn met as expected. One had black hair and a purple robe, radiating an evil presence. The other had red hair and a white robe, burning with fighting spirit. From the presence that these two carried, it felt like another battle between darkness and fire was about to take place. Of course, their battle would not be like that. Fight! The countdown ended in the blink of an eye, and the two on the battlefield did not move at all. They stood facing each other, and it looked like neither of them was going to make a move. So you've come. 1 second later, Feng Bujue said with a smile. Looks like your team has settled the score. Phantom Dawn replied coldly. It's not a difficult question. For us, there is only one answer. Put me in the first round and win the final victory. He was right. That was the only way for Order to not offend the audience and fight for glory. Even if they lost the match, they could find an excuse based on the situation. For example, if they lost because Feng Bujue did not keep his promise, the Public Relations Department of Order could use the negative public opinion of naivety to the magnanimity of a champion is that he will not back down from a challenge even if he loses. But if Feng Bujue kept his promise and won, Order, who chose to accept the challenge, would have nothing to say about them. Since they were not as good as Feng Bujue, they would put on a friendly front to congratulate their opponent. But you're really good at it. After a pause, Phantom Dawn added, even though we knew you might have set up a trap, after weighing the pros and cons, we still had to jump into it. What do you mean by that? Feng Bujue shrugged. Am I such an unreliable person in your mind? As an ally, you might be more reliable than anyone else, Phantom Dawn said. But as an enemy, you cannot be described as unreliable. I should say, you cannot be treated as a human being. Regarding Phantom Dawn's words, those who had interacted with Brother Ju deeply agreed with him. The limit of a human being was the ability to do anything, but Feng Bujue did not have that kind of limit. He belonged to the category of you cannot even imagine what he is capable of. Fine. Brother Ju did not mind being called an inhuman. He smiled easily. You can say whatever you want, but I still appeared in the first round as promised. Didn't I? Yes. With your standard, you should be praised for not doing so, even though you could have tricked us, Phantom Dawn replied. But I'm not here to chat with you or to judge your shamelessness. At this point, Phantom Dawn's eyes changed. His fiery red hair fluttered like hair standing on end, and his eyes were glowing with data. Their resolute killing intent caused the surrounding atmosphere to become heavy. Their surging fighting spirit caused the entire island beneath their feet to tremble. Feng! No! Ju! Finally, Phantom Dawn raised his voice and yelled out his opponent's name. From the first time I saw you, I have been waiting for this battle. He opened his arms and unleashed all the power in his body. With a vicious expression, he said, "Don't disappoint me, don't worry." Seeing this, Brother Ju was as calm as ever. He slowly took out Chuck Norris's razor from his inventory and started to cut his hair. I will make sure you have a good time. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.